The story begins with the protagonist, Tennoshu, a 35-year-old man who finds himself in a strange place. Confused about where he is, his mind goes back to the last thing he remembers. Waking up with a cloudy head that morning, having overslept. Despite that, he still went to work later. On the way home, the family asked him to buy yogurt. When he crossed the road back, a truck hit him suddenly. He soon found out that others had also been hit by the same truck. But there was something different about him. While the others were shining, he wasn't. Tenno wondered what he should do next. He then heard a voice, expressing concern that if nothing was done, everything would fail, the summons was incomplete, and that could send them back to their original world. Tenno's thoughts ran. What was this original world? He remembered stories of brave heroes and wondered if they were the same as the characters in the comics that his sister was obsessed with. While trying to understand the situation, he realized he was alone. The others had disappeared, but the voice seemed to suggest that they had found something important. For their shock, there was still one person left. Tenno wondered why no one had noticed. Hearing the voices, he guessed he shouldn't be a part of it, even though he was with the other 4 people. The voice had mentioned that the idea of summoning had been bad because it disturbed the balance of the world. Yet they chose to use invocation skills. Confused, Tenno could not understand what was happening. Suddenly, he felt like he was falling. He woke up under a tree, looking around, still not sure where he was. His body looked slow and heavy, as if he had no more energy, fighting to get up. He looked around and realized he was in a forest. He wondered if there was anything he could do about his slowness. The forest looked dark and dark, making it seem like everything was approaching him. He soon realized that this was the afterlife. Just as he had heard before, he had somehow been pulled into a hera-gathering ritual. He thought about how his sister loved those comic books about heroes being summoned to another world. She always told stories about them, but he never imagined they were real. Now he was beginning to wonder if he really had ended up in another world, and if there was a way home. Frustrated, he screamed loudly, but then stopped. Calming down, he knew he needed to think clearly and discover his next steps. Based on what his sister told him, he argued that this world could have magic and demons. He suddenly realized that he had screamed so loudly a moment ago, but when he looked around, there was no one to hear him. As he kept walking, he whispered to himself that everything seemed scary and he didn't feel well. Something was attached to his body since he woke up, and it seemed like I was slowly crawling to him. He thought of asking someone for help, but all he could see were trees as far as the eye could go. He felt his condition worsened the longer he stayed there. Since he woke up, he hadn't felt so uncomfortable in his whole life. No matter how he looked, the forest was surrounded by darkness, and maybe it was some kind of curse that made him feel so tired. Maybe it was an evil spirit or something. He wasn't sure, but that was the only explanation he could have. The black mist around him seemed to spin in the air, and he thought of cleansing spells and evil demons. He looked around, wondering what he was doing. Feeling like an idiot, he didn't even know if magic or spirits were real. But something was different. He could feel it, and he wanted to know if his body was slowly recovering. When he looked around again, he raised his hand and tried a purification spell. To his surprise, the black mist began to disappear. Tenno got tense, wondering if the evil spirit was really climbing on him. Finally hit him that this world was one where magic could really be used. He thought to himself that maybe it wouldn't be so bad to escape reality once in a while. Suddenly, a wolf appeared, growling and approaching. Tenno was shocked at first. I don't know if it was a dog. But then he realized he was definitely a wolf. He asked himself what to do. It would be reckless to fight him, so maybe he should try and go slow. The wolf kept coming. Tenno was sure that if he ran away, he would chase him. As he observed, he noticed that the legs of the wolf were shaking, almost as if it were the prey here. He knew he needed to get out of there. The wolf jumped as if to attack, but suddenly fell, howling in pain. Tenno wondered if he was suffering from the same black mist he had encountered before. His fear increased, but his animal lover instinct began, and he knew he had to try to save the wolf. thinking about how the purification magic had worked on him before. He decided to try on the wolf. To his surprise, the wolf growled at him, but Tenno decided to try. He raised his hand and used the magic of purification. It worked. The wolf healed before his eyes. Tenno felt a rush of affection. The wolf, once scary, now seemed almost beautiful. Despite the size, it seemed cooler and scarier, and he even had the desire to caress his skin. The wolf began to move towards him, and Tenno noticed that he had dirt on his skin, being from Japan, where cleaning was highly valued. He instinctively thought the wolf could use some cleaning. He wondered if magic could help. He sang a cleansing spell while imagining the wolf completely clean. After a moment, the wolf stretched the body like it cooled off, looked at it, and Tenno was surprised to see he was leaving. Was he really going? He murmured to himself, but then, to his surprise, the wolf began to run beside him, keeping pace. Tenno wondered how fast it was. It seemed that the wolf felt he was not an ordinary person. About 200 years ago, the forest was swallowed up by darkness, an event that is not easily provoked by common means, yet somehow mankind managed to make it happen as darkness spread, swallowed up the forest, and the weak were eliminated, leaving only the strong behind. The wolf Tenno encountered was, in fact, King Fenrir. For the past 2 centuries, he had watched over the forest, witnessing countless deaths. His magical power was strong enough to resist being consumed by darkness for a while. The purification magic he used to get away from darkness was just a temporary solution. The act of singing the spells emptied his magic, and repeated them more and more exhausted his power at an alarming rate. He had done so for years, using almost all his magic. Fenrir understood that at this rate he would not survive much longer. But when his strength dwindled, he felt the presence of humans. A wave of frustration increased within him. He thought he would massacre each of them before their end. Directed by the smell of a close human, he ran to attack, eager to kill. That's when he found Tenno. Fenrir stopped in his tracks. Frustration boiling inside him, he couldn't believe. He didn't expect to be so weak. And yet here he was, on the verge of collapse. Fenrir noticed that Tenno was trying to signal him to stay away, thought to himself that the darkness was swallowing him, and he couldn't lose consciousness yet. His frustration was overwhelming, but then he fainted. Tenno, seeing Fenrir fall, ran to his side and used the magic of purification in him. Fenrir realized that while the effect was temporary, the magic seemed to work better than he expected. There were no visible wounds, and he marveled at the overflowing magical power Tenno possessed, which passed through the whole body of Fenrir, healing him. Had never witnessed such precise and unlimited magic before. For the first time, he felt as if he had made a human his master, and the strange part was that Fenrir felt no resistance in expressing his obedience. The scene changed to Tenno and Fenrir running together. Tenno felt refreshed, the air felt lighter, as if magic had revived him and the wolf. They stopped by a cave, their entrance covered in black mist. Fenrir turned to him, as if he wanted to enter. Tenno cautiously approached the cave, murmuring that it seemed dark and giving him a bad feeling. He preferred not to enter, but as Fenrir approached, Tenno laughed and said that he was joking, with determination. Tenno used the magic of purification in the cave, trying to dispel the black mist. He reached out and touched the entrance, but the curse did not fade. He wondered how great the place really was and what was inside. As Tenno looked into the cave, he saw several pairs of bright eyes looking at him. He wanted to know if this is where Fenrir and the other wolves lived. Some wolves growl and roar, but Fenrir stopped them with a command presence. Tenno quickly realized that all wolves were cursed. Determined to help, he used his cleansing magic on them. But as he did, his eyes fell upon the lifeless bodies of other wolves who had not survived. He knew he had to make it work somehow. He imagined the curse disappearing more clearly this time. Focusing all his energy on magic, he cast the cleansing spell again, and for his relief, the curse lifted from the wolves, wiping them. Among the wolves, Tenno noticed a dog all unclean and defiled by the curse. His eyes were full of sadness, and he wondered if they understood what he was trying to do. He cast the cleansing spell on them again, and as the magic washed them away, the wolves and the dog were delivered from their curse. Tenno realized that they were all friends, united by suffering with a sense of fulfillment. Tenno stayed there, thinking about what to do next. As he looked forward, he saw two paths leading further into the cave, turned to Fenrir and wondered if he knew what was on these paths. Fenrir shook his head, indicating he had no idea. Tenno understood that wolves could understand his language, and for the first time he wondered if he could really trust them for guidance. Looking deeper into the cave, he could feel the darkness getting thicker the more they went. The curse seemed to be intensifying, and he was sure there was a reason for it. He tried the purification magic several times more. But the curse seemed infinite, as if it were a force that would never disappear. As he looked back at the wolves, he noticed they were still fighting. The curse still affected them despite their efforts. He knew he had to think of something fast to protect them. His mind ran, and the idea of creating a barrier came to him. But he also knew it would be difficult. He had to act quickly before the curse overpowered them. He then tried to create a barrier around them all, mentioning that it seemed to have worked. He wondered if the barrier would be effective against physical attacks as well. Still unsure of what was out there, he thought maybe strengthening the barrier would help. Making it resistant against physical and magical attacks, it was worth a try. He tried, but Fenrir just looked at him. Tenno then explained that he had just reinforced the barrier, so they must be safe. Inside, Diki realized that the cave was much bigger than he expected. There must be something he can do with his magic in this situation. He considered using night vision or clairvoyance, but none seemed useful, and he wasn't sure what kind of image he should focus on. However, he soon realized that it was only a matter of recognizing the shape of his surroundings. He used night vision and spatial awareness, which seemed incredibly real, although it was designed only in his mind. He mentioned he was going to purify every inch of the area and started using his purification magic. He didn't stop there. He also reinforced the barrier around space. As he looked at the wolves, who were looking forward, he noticed a giant rock. Suddenly, something in him began to shine brightly. He wondered if anything had hit the barrier. Turning to Fenrir, he asked if there was some kind of curse on the rock. Fenrir appeared completely blank, and Tenno understood that there was no immediate response. He was slowly approaching the rock, feeling more and more restless. After a while, he looked at Fenrir's aggressive expression and wondered if the rock was alive, as his behavior reminded him the first time they met. He then decided to use purification on the rock. He wondered if he should focus more on imagining the purifying rock, imagining it until he disappeared completely, as he had seen in movies and commercials. However, he knew it would not work on a stubborn rock. Instead, he tried to imagine something persistent, something that would not easily break, slowly cracking until he disappeared forever. Then he used the purification spell on the rock, and gradually she disappeared. To his surprise, he found a bird lying there. The bird slowly rose, beating its wings. He thought regenerating a wound was different from curing damaged cells and closing wounds, so he used a healing spell, followed by a cleansing magic in the bird. Soon, the bird seemed to be completely healed, looking beautiful, although its size remained unhappy. The bird beaked Tenno's hand, indicating it was still hurting. He apologized, gently moving his hand over the bird. Tenno was excited to take a little break. When he sat down, he found it strange, but the battle seemed to shine in his mind, and he realized there were still so many things he didn't understand. He decided to increase the barrier, and as he looked out, he noticed a black tattoo shadow trying to get into the barrier. The barrier, in turn, was attacking the shadow, forcing him to retreat. Tenno looked around, thinking about magic, but decided to lead it for now. He found some security on the barrier force, but there was one thing that still intrigued him: the wolves. They didn't seem to be improving. He looked at Fenrir, who looked tired. Tenno noticed that he didn't think Fenrir had eaten anything since they arrived and wondered if Fenrir was too busy with something else. Tenno sat there too, not sure what he could do. His main concern at that time was to find a safe place to sleep, as well as to ensure food and water. He knew he had to concentrate on the essentials to survive. He remembered that he needed to stay alive and avoid being caught in something foolish that could lead to his death. The cave looked like one of the best places to relax, and if he could purify the whole cave, he would be able to sleep in peace. But to do that, he needed to figure out what the black shadow was. The way he reacted with the barrier suggested he had a source outside the cave. He also felt uncomfortable when he felt the presence of the shadow, so he knew he had to do something about it. He thought about it for a moment and realized that he couldn't purify it without understanding what it was. But before that, he needed a better view of the whole cave. He wanted to know if he could do it with the magic he had used before, spatial consciousness. He tried to use it, but the shadows were so dense that it was hard to see through them, yet he could say there was another space inside the cave. It looked like he could only see inside the barrier, and beyond his limits, he could not understand anything. He thought that something like clairvoyance or clairvoyance could work. What he needed was magic that allowed him to see the cave from a different perspective, something like a drone or a video camera. He remembered how beautiful it was to watch an aerial scene of a sunset captured by a drone on TV. This image got him, inspired by the idea. He decided to try to use clairvoyance. A screen appeared in front of him, which scared him, but it worked. Through the screen, he saw a huge rock mountain, but the entrance was surprisingly small. He focused on purifying the area, imagining that he could cover all the space, wasn't sure if curses could be reversed, but he wanted to know if purifying the shadow would bring the curse back to its source. With that thought, he used purification magic and strengthened the barrier upon him. While he was doing this, the wolves wandered around him, watching closely. He felt like something was leaving his body and wondered if it was magic. The black curse seemed to be retreating from the plants, and everything began to feel perfect, free of curse. However, an hour later, he noticed that the shadow had returned, looked closer to see where it came from, and he found out he was coming off the floor. It was incredibly annoying, and he knew he'd have to purify it again. This time, the curse seemed even bigger and deeper, so he decided to cover the ground with the barrier. Taking the curse back to its source, continued using purification on Earth. After a while, he sat down, feeling mentally exhausted, though not physically tired. He realized that he was trembling and wondered what he should do next. He wanted to come home. Fenrir came and sat near him, and Tenno gently caressed his skin, wondering if he was really a wild creature. Surprisingly, it calmed him down. He thought to himself that no matter how much he pondered the situation or how pessimistic he felt, he had to move on, even if the weight of Fenrir's body was a little too much to deal with. It brought him some comfort. Later that night, the scene changed to a distant castle. A stone floated over a strange magic circle, and something strange caught the attention of a close man. The man approached the king and reported that something unusual was happening in the forest. There were sightings of white light emanating from the center of the forest. The king mentioned it was the final fight of the king of the forest before his death, and then commanded man to sacrifice more blood to the magic stone. The man agreed to the order. The king declared that they were so close to taking control of the forest, the center of the world, that these beasts had a strong king in the forest. But that was a long-forgotten story. It was time for all to die and be honored, their lives devoted to the emperor for such a great cause. One day the king asked the man what was wrong with the forest. There have been no changes in the forest in recent decades, and the king wondered what was happening. The kingdom of Invalus cast a complex magic spell over the entire forest, and many of the sacred beasts had disappeared as demons began to emerge. The man mentioned that in the last 200 years, no country dared to fight Invalus, and because of that, some of the countries around the forest had completely disappeared. It could be true, man added, that the kingdom of Invalus had sacrificed hundreds of thousands of lives for its evil magic eye. He expressed his fear that there was nothing they could do about it. Although he did not want to accept it, man knew that soon humans would rule the world. He left, murmuring that the kingdom of Invalus would eventually disappear, just like the others. He hoped that the god of creation could help them, while Tenno woke, stretching her body. He felt a sense of relief and joy as he looked up to see the blue sky. He then looked at Fenrir, thinking that once Tenno was purified, Fenrir would probably go away. He asked Fenrir if he was willing to stay with him, not understanding Fenrir's answer. Tenno wanted to know if he should name Fenrir. He remembered that during his first encounter, the first thing he had noticed was Fenrir's white and silver skin, so he decided to call him Ko. There were two more wolves with the same skin color, so he called the female So and the male Hyo. There was also a black wolf which he called Kuro, and the last white wolf he called Shan. He felt a little strange naming so many wolves, but there was also a dog in the group, which he called Chai. He then looked at the bird, admiring the beautiful gradient of colors in his feathers and his lovely voice. He decided to call him Karen. He praised himself for having a great sense of appointment. For a moment, he felt that he almost remembered something important, but quickly dismissed it, realizing that it didn't matter. He told himself it was time to focus on the current reality, while Fenrir was confused, clearly intrigued by the fact that he had received a name. One of the wolves asked him what the human had said. Ko replied that Tenno had given all the names, and that if not for him, his Fenrir race would have been eliminated. Tenno, he added, had exceptionally great magical and healing powers. Staying by his side, they would benefit as Tenno had regained his magical powers, so they should obey him as their lord. He turned to Chai and asked what he thought. Chai replied that he had been treated well by all of them, so there was no reason not to obey his orders. Ko added that with the strength they received from their master, they would do their best to serve him. Tenno then asked Ko if he knew of any water source. As they looked at him, he clarified that he was asking about a place where water could be found. Karu and Cheyenne went ahead to guide him. Tenno asked them to wait for him while he followed them. He noticed that even though they went through the barrier, they were still advancing. When they reached the water, Tenno looked at her and thought she was filthy. He wanted to know if this could be considered water. When he looked at Karu and Chien, they seemed comfortable with it. But he observed that even if he purified it, it still seemed strange. He gently hit Karu and Chien on their heads, appreciating them. Tenno realized that he could not purify the water until he had healed. They then began to move away from the water, and he mentioned that using it didn't seem viable. He wanted them to have access to the water from the fountain inside the barrier, or better yet, the pure water from Japan, so he looked at his hand, and as he thought about water, suddenly appeared in his palm. Tenno was amazed at the water that appeared from the palm of his hand when he imagined. Magic was really incredible. He wanted to know if he could create something he wanted to eat. He then asked if he could make juden with a boiled egg, extra sauce, and extra red ginger. But nothing appeared. He sighed and said, "It is not possible with cooked food." He tried to order cabbage, but still nothing came out. He then tried to order chicken meat and an apple, but the result was the same. He realized that maybe he couldn't do things that didn't exist in this world. He decided he'd have to look for food around here instead. He looked up at the mountain, thinking that if he was going to use Rocky Mountain as a base, he was supposed to protect the area around her. It would be great if the trees around you had nuts or fruit. He saw some mushrooms but did dare touch them, and decided to stay away from them. He examined the branches of the trees, realizing there were no flowers, no fruit, no nuts, just trees. If he couldn't find anything, he was afraid to starve. All of a sudden, Hyo appeared from behind, followed by Ko, who seemed to be angry with them. After that, Hyo, Karu, and Cheyenne began to flee, and Tenno wondered where they were going. Tenno looked at Ko without understanding his low growls, like the wolf was trying to say something. Although Ko responded so calmly, Tenno still did not understand what he meant. He then realized that Ko must be disturbed too. He moved his hand to gently beat Ko and reassured him, saying, "They'll all come back soon. We'll keep looking for food." But at the bottom, Tenno wondered if they really would come back. He mentioned aloud that there were nothing but trees around, and at that time, he was hungry. He thought to himself that if he couldn't find nuts or fruit in this world, He wasn't sure what he would do. Suddenly he saw a new cave. He remembered that the cave had been in since that morning was hard to access, perched on a high edge. However, this new cave looked like a much better place to live. Although he knew he couldn't approach her carelessly, he decided to use his spatial consciousness to examine the cave. He found out it was pretty big, and there was a passage up that went up 3 floors. There was also a lot of underground space. He felt a wave of excitement when he thought about exploring it, just as he was imagining the possibilities. The sound of the returning wolves struck his ears. Tenno smiled, relieved to see them return. To their surprise, they brought with them the corpse of a giant beast. Surprising, Tenno asked that if everyone brought this to him. Everyone looked at him, excited. And Tenno couldn't help but feel dazzled. The giant beast they brought was to be eaten for him. He didn't feel as excited as they did about eating it, but he knew he had no choice. He had to eat it. He embraced the 3 wolves, happy and appreciative, then asked who would be the only one to disassemble the carcass. He decided that the first thing he should do was purify every corner and crack of the flesh. Imagining a vacuum cleaner in his mind, he used purification to clean the beast completely. As he focused on dirt and impurities, he persisted, sending the curse back to his source. After cleaning up, the meat finally seemed ready to eat, and it even looked delicious. Tenno speculated he looked like a boar, but he wasn't sure. It could have been some kind of monster. He then looked at Ko and thought that the wolf, too, was some kind of monster. When Ko began to approach the boar, Tenno found it beautiful and amusing. He thought, given the state of the boar, Ko might even bite. However, Tenno knew that if no one else would disassemble him, he would have to do it himself. He looked at the wolves and told them they didn't have to just look at him so much. Let's start eating. He then wondered how he should disassemble the meat and if there was any way to preserve it so that it would not spoil or worsen. He thought of a way to cool it, imagining the cooling effect of the luxury refrigerator he had bought on the payday. He used cooling magic on it. Then he felt satisfied, but then realized he needed to train the blood. However, he felt a little uncomfortable, thinking he was completely irrational, and wanted to know if magic could help you with that. He then considered that blood was similar to water and thought to drain, but quickly discarded the idea, knowing that it would dry. He touched the boar's body, focusing on its internal organs. As he visualized the interior, he felt a wave of nausea. Ko wondered what the Lord was doing. She suggested that perhaps something displeased him. Haya mentioned that it was likely when the boar was still warm. Everyone looked at it with disappointment, and Tenno wondered about the blood vessels and internal organs, contemplating how to remove them all. At first, he just decided to remove the blood vessels in an instant and burn them, which seemed like a good solution. Ko told others that, unlike them, Tenno had no claws or fangs, so it would be difficult for him to eat. All agreed that if Ko ordered them to, they would cut everything. Tenno used instant movement, and as something emerged from the top of the boar's body, the wolves seemed excited. But all of a sudden, Tenno burned the stuff, shocking everyone. He removed the ashes, and everyone looked at him with disappointed faces. Tenno mentioned that he was going to clean it using cleansing magic and remove the stench of meat. He had cut a fish before, but an animal like this had many internal organs, like liver, kidneys, brain and eyes, and he couldn't help imagining them. He used instant movement again to get the liver out, and the wolves were excited, attracted by the smell. Tenno then burned the liver, shocking everyone. He thought it ended well and decided that next time he would close his eyes while carrying out the process. He was able to cool down and burn things when he tried, and when it came to natural phenomena, he could use magic for that too. Tenno told the wolves that he was going to remove the rest of his guts and asked for some space. When he saw their disappointed faces, he asked what was wrong. He used wind magic to cut off the boar carcass. But then he realized he forgot to remove the hair. He brought meat to himself, and told the wolves to help themselves. Ko allowed those who brought him first to take his share. She asked Ko if it would be okay if he ate a little too. Ko agreed, telling him that everyone needed to continue until the abundant forest came back. Daringly, if anyone were to say this as a human, they were all sharing the same little destiny. She commented that Ko certainly had much wisdom. Ko then asked if Chi had forgotten that he was also the king of the terrible wolves. Chi replied that he was not a king, but a useless leader who could not even protect his friends. Ko encouraged him, saying that the child would find them safely. He then began to eat the meat, suggesting that since they received their long-awaited names, they should also call each other by those names. Tenno then shouted while burning all the meat, and told Ko he wanted a little more. He took the extract and put it in a stone, mentioning it wasn't good since it turned into coal, much like the meat before. He decided to take his time, heat him up with infrared radiation, and slowly began to cook it. While wolves ate raw meat, they began to smell the cooked meat and looked at Tenno. Tenno understood his look and smiled, realizing that he had made the right choice by putting her on the rock, that now had turned a beautiful brown color. He took the stone, stabbed it in the flesh, and thought it was too hard and slightly burned. After that he started eating, provoking that he would not share this. Something strange was happening near a rock. He entered the cave with the wolves, thinking that the first thing he needed to do was explore it as a base. The area between the outer surface and the interior of the cave looked good. There were no signs of anything living inside. Deciding that with the high ceiling had turned the first floor into the main room, he thought of matching it with where he was the day before, which would give him a four-story mansion. The first level would be the underground layer, which was vast and had a high ceiling. He noticed that it seemed that space was still very far behind. Although he was curious about what was shining on the back wall, he found no sign of life there. The ground seemed safe, so the real concern was what was below. He then used his spatial consciousness again and confirmed that there was really something below. He even wondered how long the barrier he had launched the previous day would last. He realized he needed to understand magic better soon. After deciding to check below first, he hugged Ko, saying he didn't want to fall. Ko licked him, and he said he felt better now, ready to go down. As they descend, Tenno found a large amount of shadow curse remaining in the area. Ko felt something and began to shine towards him. The curse seemed to be approaching him, so Tenno ran to use purification magic. To his surprise, the barrier he had placed before reacted, and he did not expect it. He wondered if the purification had failed. As the curse slowly began to disappear, Tenno wondered if they had succeeded. And because there was nothing else around, the curse reminded him of those around Karen from before, and he thought there might be something else about it. Then he saw a spider, who confused him because he had wings. He decided to ignore it for now and concentrate on dealing with the black curse, using purification on it. As the curse continued to disappear, the spider watched them. Tenno noticed it looked like the spider was coming out of the ground, so he knew he had to purify it properly. When he looked closer, he realized there was a chief spider along with 20 minors. He examined them more closely, commenting that the world also had insects. He wondered if they were variants of monsters. People always said spiders were useful animals, but he hesitated because this one had wings. It wasn't a typical spider. Ko looked closer and noted that it was impressive that it had survived so long. Suddenly, the spider chief exploded and fell into Tenno's hair. The smaller spiders crawled in Chai, causing him trouble. Tenno realized they didn't seem too harmful. He mentioned that the second layer of the cave was also spacious, so they should check through the blocks and crannies afterwards. He remembered that before he had just screamed the cleansing spell, and even if he didn't have a clear mental image, the magic still worked. He remembered his sister telling him that having a mental image was crucial to cast magic, but he wanted to know if the case could be different here. He decided to try something different. Instead of imagining, he simply said fire, but nothing happened. He wondered why nothing was happening without a clear image in his mind. He then tried again, this time with water, and saw some liquid near. He focused on imagining fire and spoke the words again, and this time the magic worked. The fire frightened the wolves. He realized that the magic worked when he imagined, but wondered what the difference was when he didn't. He then tried to imagine the water while it said fire, and the fire appeared again. He wondered if, by using new magic, having a clear mental image was necessary. When he advanced, he noticed that magic seemed to move with him. He wondered if, once a word had been linked to magic, the word gave priority and would always be associated with that image. It seemed convenient, but he was not sure. As he was thinking, he noticed a crack in the cave wall and realized that the wind was coming through it. He touched the crack, thinking the space inside could be spacious, but there seemed to be no curses, and he couldn't see anything inside. He wanted to know if the light could help, like a ball of light, and when he raised him, he was so brilliant that he made Ko squint and felt pressure in his eyes. Tenno apologized for it. He then tried to dim the light, but found it tiring to adjust the magic properly. He asked the wolves if they were all worried. Then he tried to look inside the rift, mentioning that he could see shimmering stones. He wondered what they could be. So the spider head came in and brought a little stone. Tenno realized it was silver stone, a beautiful material. He called the spider chief and thanked him for the gift. He realized that calling the spider boss seemed right. For some reason, the wolves were looking at the stone. Tenno wondered if it was rare. It was certainly beautiful, but he had no immediate use for it, so he carefully put it in his coat. As he advanced, Tenno mentioned that the other floors could also have bright objects, but that didn't matter at the time. Shine commented to Kuru in Tenno's calm composure when he saw the metrol. Kuru wondered if Tenno was really human. Tenno thought there were no other cracks or spaces to explore, and now the conquest of Rocky Mountain was complete. He hadn't checked his purse yet and found some things inside, although he didn't expect any of them to be helpful. When he looked aside, his smartphone was impressed. After protecting the base, Tenno planned to look for humans, but he also wanted to strengthen the area so that at least it was a comfortable place to sleep. While he sat with Ko, he leaned on saying that at least he should add something to the floor, since there he was making his ass hurt. He wanted to know if there was anything soft and soft he could use. Suddenly the ground changed, and he wondered if it had been softened. The wolves looked at him by surprise, and he wondered what they were thinking. Regardless of that change, the area was more comfortable, and it could smooth the surface of the rock. The whole surface was now well preserved, and the wolves mentioned how amazing it was. Ko said it was hard to believe those hard stones were now full of magical power. It was as expected of his lord. He then added that once he had got there first, he would take the lead. But all of a sudden, everyone started sliding on the surface. Tenno was surprised to see it, and he thought the adjustment magic was difficult. Ko managed to stand up, thinking to himself that he almost made a fool of himself if he had fallen there. Lightnings lit up the night sky, its ferocious bolts reaching the barrier created by Tenno. However, only the spider chief noticed. The spider was reminded of his past, when he carried the infernal flames and dwelt at the bottom of the earth. There he dragged any Pri unhappy enough to roam the lava, and his relatives feared him for it. In those days, his existence seemed doomed to death, for he was Tyronia, the keeper of death. At that time, the spider was huge, but now it shrunk. It stopped, reflecting on how small it had become. It seemed that he had used all his magic protecting the children. Somehow they survived, perhaps by luck, or perhaps because of his sacrifice. But how did such a potent miasma disappear? Ko called him by his real name. As the spider answered, he wondered aloud if Ko's perception of him was real or merely imagined. If his shape became so fragile that even a gust of wind could make him fly, he dismissed Ko's concern, saying it was none of his business. Instead, he asked how things had come to be this way. The forest was again fragrant with magic, as it had been in the past. He then asked about the dark magical power. But he hesitated to mention Tenno. Ko said he understood what the spider was trying to convey, but they were also saved by Tenno's power. The spider rejected this, insisting that it was impossible and arguing that it was humans who contaminated the forest. Ko disagreed, explaining that the quality of Tenno's magic was completely different. so they revered him as their master. The spider wondered if Ko was proud of Fenrir. Ko replied that they had no ill will toward the spider's family, yet he warned that if the spider turned against its master, it would be disastrous. The spider mocked, claiming it would never do something so terrible. No matter how they looked at it, Tenno seemed to possess several hundred times more magic than any of them in full force. The spider noted that he could feel Tenno's magic gently sinking, quickly restoring the forest. Ko assured him that as long as there was no hostility, everything would be fine. He did not want the number of kings in his forest to decrease further. The spider asked why Ko assumed he would lose. Ko, calculating, leaving aside his jokes and asking him to tell his children to stop teasing Chai. The spider realized that his children were not really teasing him. Ko explained that since they walked away from him and swarmed around Chai, the last one had been completely frightened. The spider then asked, who was Che? Ko replied that Chai was named after their master, and he even suggested that the spider call him Ko. The spider recognized that it was indeed his name, and then thought of Tenno, who had called him chief the day before. He then asked about last night's lightning, how he had unleashed a terrible wave of magical power. Ko replied that it was probably humans again, launching some kind of attack, but the Tenno barrier had stopped. The boss was surprised to hear it, and mentioned that it should have been impossible, asked if Ko was actually insinuating that Tenno was maintaining a barrier that covered the whole sky. Doing so, he reasoned, eventually exhausting his magic. Ko agreed, admitting that even in his previous state, he would not have been able to maintain such a barrier even for a moment. However, his master seemed to be completely unaffected, while Tenno sat alone, deeply in thought. In the last few days, he had seen no sign of humans. While preparing his home, he tried to inspect the area by flying his clairvoyant drone, but no matter how far he traveled, there was nothing but endless forest. Despite covering a great distance, all he observed were several animals. There was not a single house or road in sight. As far as the eyes could see, the world was nothing but desert. He began to wonder if it had ended up in a world where mankind did not exist. Lying down, he reassured himself that there was still hope. There were places he still had to look for. On the other hand, the remodeling of his home was progressing smoothly, helping to change the atmosphere of the place. Since then, after numerous attempts and mistakes, he managed to make the floors and walls feel softer. He also carved rock stairs, creating passages to the upper and lower floors. Through this process, he became more qualified in instant movement. Outside, it still looked like an ordinary mountain, but inside, a network of stairs led to the top floor, as well as a spacious mansion with a two-story basement. While observing the inner structure of the rock, I wished there was someone nearby who could appreciate his work. However, he was only surrounded by wolves. Using instant motion, he pondered a recent trend. Some of the animals began to compete over who could eat the organs of his prey first. This made him think of how certain creatures, such as Inuits and other groups, ate raw food to maximize their vitamin intake. Maybe bringing fresh meat wasn't necessarily a bad thing. Still, eating only meat for every meal became tiring. Just as he hoped, he longed for fish. At this time, he would even settle for a curst. The monotony of the flesh was becoming unbearable, so he noticed Ko acting strangely, worried. He wondered what was wrong. Soon he realized that the cursed creatures had returned, and this time they were actively attacking. Even they were getting hit. He disapproved, wondering what was going on. After the terrible lightning last night, things were getting more and more annoying. He then told them not to worry and take a deep breath. Climbing to the top of the cave, he activated his clairvoyant drone. Scanning the area, he noticed that the whole forest was finally covered with a persistent curse. However, he also remembered to see a large lake outside the barrier the day before. If he purified everything to that point, he could simultaneously expand and strengthen the barrier. Ko watched him curiously, wondering what he was planning to do. Tenno considered whether he could reach the lake from his current position. He decided to test it first, letting his magic flow out, something he had used while exploring all those rocks. He imagined stretching a single, long, thin line of magic toward the lake, went further than he had predicted, but he felt confident he could do it. While he unleashed an immense amount of power, Ko could feel the intensity of his magic. It was overwhelming, and it could become dangerous. Tenno then instructed, "Now imagine expanding the extended magic everywhere, covering everything to the lake, while ensuring that it involves as deep as the bottom of the earth." Following this method, he successfully extended the barrier and purified the land to the lake. The barrier has expanded almost 10 times, and strangely, he felt his body becoming lighter. Standing on Ko's forehead, he commented, "It really seems unlimited. They were no match for me." Ko agreed. Tenno felt that the curse mixed in the water was mostly flowing from the outside. He guessed that he could try to filter using the barrier membrane as a sort of filter. He decided to carefully create a 3-layer filtration system, although it looked like something, or someone, was casting the curse. Until the other side stopped his raids, he decided that from that moment on, he would send the curse accumulated every day. He then put a hand on Ko and said, "Let's finish it by tomorrow." The scene changed to the kingdom, who was well protected. A man was watching outside, observing that it was another peaceful day. Miss Lost, the commander of the Fourth Order Shavrik of the Invelis Kingdom, approached, calling Gamers. Gamers, the commander of the First Order Shavrik, recognized Miss Lost's early return. Miss Lost replied that nothing important had appeared this time. The players asked if there was any change in the forest. Since then, Miss Lost denied, but he was sure that a monster would eventually emerge. Still, the kingdom was protected by the mighty barrier of the king, and even if something happened, they would be safe. The players noticed that it should be all right, although he hesitated. Did Miss Lost notice that this was not like the Gamers? He was bothered by the strange light coming from the forest. Players waved, explaining that a few days ago, a bright light spread in all directions from the center of the forest. Using a magic stone, their king had acquired the power to suppress the kings of the forest, but in all their years, they had never witnessed such a drastic change. The king of the forest was not only a myth, and it was miraculous that he still maintained such power. Miss Lost recognized this, noting that this is precisely why the fourth research expedition was expanded, but ensured that everything would be all right. He reminded the Gamers that Invelis was repelling foreign invaders for over 400 years, thanks to the strength of the king and the magicians. All they needed to do was trust the king and fight. He looked out once more, murmuring that while Miss Lost's words were true, they had to remain vigilant of the magical beasts growing stronger outside the barrier. The knights barely fought, and there was little real meaning to do. Now Miss Lost was going home to enjoy a hot bath. Gamers apologized for stopping him, so turned his thoughts to the magic stone, and the complex magic spell that was established to control what was considered the center of the world, the forest. All this was sustained by a single magic stone. The stone was found in an ancient ruin, emitting a strange magical power. There were rumors that the blood of many magicians, who tried to analyze the stone, had been poured out in vain. The king and court that controlled the power of the stone used him to stop their aging, and for hundreds of years they managed to maintain their positions as rulers. The players knew the story wasn't entirely true. While they seemed to age slowly, it was natural for him to never question the fact that the stability of the whole kingdom was being held by this one stone. He couldn't help but wonder, what was this mysterious magic stone? When Gamers left, he noticed a group of elves heading towards him. As they passed him, he admired the intricate patterns on his back, thinking to himself that before he knew it, they had already gone there. A man, wanting to rush them, cried out to move faster. Gamers noted this and noted that it was quite unusual for such a large number of slaves to walk around. The man recognized Gamers as the commander of the First Gentlemanly Order, and asked if he had any business with the slave house. The players denied, explained that he was simply passing by. The man, a little relieved, replied that even if the players wanted to acquire slaves, he could not deliver as supplies were running out. The players were surprised, and the man quickly added that, the day before, about 50 beasts had been taken as offerings to the magic stone. With their numbers dropping, they stopped what they were doing to solve the problem. Players still processing this. He waved, but said he must be on his way. When the man said goodbye, a figure clothed in knight's armor and carrying a sword, accompanied by another person, approached. How rare it is to see the commander of the First Gentlemanly Order in such a place. The shielded figure observed. Gamers immediately recognized him, Gamal, the commander of the Fifth Gentlemanly Order. He thought Gamal was the #1 battle addict. Even among the magic troops of the Fifth Order, Gamers was never good at dealing with people like him, trying to lead the conversation in a less strange direction. Gamers commented, his new sword seems impressive. Gamal explained that the king recently gave him the sword, which resembled the king's blade, a magic weapon that became stronger and sharper the more blood he drank. Gamal was eager to test his new sword on some slaves, and was contemplating following the king's example, drinking much of his blood. However, Gamers advised moderation. When Gamal left, he told the man that he was supervising the slaves to find him some who seemed more attractive. The man replied that the slaves were chosen specifically for reproduction, for which Gamal mocked, saying he didn't care. Then commanded the man to cut off the heads of 2 slaves. To his satisfaction, the sharpness of the sword was extraordinary. Gamal murmured that he was becoming boring with the slave crest, making them unanswered. The priest accompanying Gamal asked him to wait for the sword to absorb the energy, explained that a special technique was needed. Gamal impatiently told you to proceed with this. Meanwhile, Gamers was reflecting on how the kingdom seemed to be falling into madness. The scene then moved to Tenno, who was preparing a fish trap. Despite having to use vines instead of the line, he proudly mentioned that he had managed to craft it. While he was shaking the trap to demonstrate to Ko, he explained that it was a method of catching fish. Just as Kiru came to eat the little piece of meat, Tenno commented that it was not tasty. He then kept going towards the lake, hoping there would be fish. When he reached the lake, he was discouraged by finding a curse on him. Disappointed, he murmured to himself, even though he had hope and came here to find it. He used a verification method and confirmed his suspicion. It wasn't good. The curse woven in the water was hard to purify. Tenno created a barrier, stating that he would temporarily leave the lake and the river to concentrate on water purification. But what could he do to clean it up? He used a method to filter the river through the barrier membrane. However, he needed a way to separate the curse over a wider area. He couldn't think of anything. He pondered how the curse seemed to spread everywhere, as if he had crossed the centrifugal of a washing machine. While he was rubbing his hand in Ka's hair, he noticed that her hair was straightening. An idea lit up in his mind. Static electricity could accumulate dust, so maybe you could do the same with the curse. Curious, he decided to try. With a focused thought, he moved his hand to the lake, imagining applying a layer of static electricity to the surface to absorb the curse. To your surprise, it worked. However, the surface of the lake was now covered with numerous small black spots, remains of the curse, making everything more disgusting. The scene went back to the castle, where the priests were gathered around a magic stone. One of the men asked if there was any matter about the court marriage. The court wizard replied that it was nothing important. The day before, the stone had not been affected by any near stress, which caused some concern. The man noticed that he had not noticed anything unusual. The court mage studied the stone, wondering if it was just his imagination. After a moment, he focused on a specific area of the stone. Meanwhile, in the lake, Tenno gathered all the energy of the curse in the sky. He proudly announced that he had finally collected everything. The wolves watched in shock. Tenno continued, saying that, as promised the day before, he would try to send the energy of the curse back, along with the amount he had collected inside the barrier. He concentrated, imagining returning the curse to the source. In an instant, he made it disappear, leaving the lake completely clean. Tenno smiled with satisfaction, mentioning that now he would have to wait a while to see if the animals returned. Ko, too, was very happy. Tenno turned to the wolves and said it was time to come home to work on some interior design. In the castle, the wizard called Tenno to examine a scratch on the magic stone. As he did, the stone began to shine brightly, wondering what was going on. The magician noticed that a small rift had appeared in the stone. The scene moved to the main hall, where the king sat, flanked by his ministers who were in line. A man finished presenting the report of the day, and the bald man next to the king asked the next. He noted that nothing important had been mentioned, expressing his boredom. The only report he was interested in hearing was that the forest and the world were now in his hands. He questioned how sacrifices to the barrier of the magic stone had gone the other day. And if the forest was on the verge of collapse, he spoke with a dark determination, saying that he would squeeze life out of the forest, dry it until it was nothing but dust, and use it as the cornerstone of his world. Soon thereafter, he would completely destroy the unclean and remnant of the animals. Soon after, a knight ran with an urgent report. The man beside the king asked himself aloud about the source of the commotion. The knight kneeled before the king, trembling, and with a nervous voice, reported that there was a crack in the magic stone. The bald man asked if the knight was right, emphasizing that the room had the same barrier as the one protecting the country. The knight confirmed, saying that it was not only that the barrier seemed strange, that the room had briefly lightened with light, and then, unmistakably, a crack appeared in the stone. The king's anger lit up, and he snapped, ordering the execution of the knight. The players, always composed, gave a signal to contain the knight. All in the room, although silent, shared the same thoughts. Everyone knew that criticizing the king's anger would result in a fate similar to that of a slave. The king, still boiling, called Miss Lost, telling him to go immediately into the forest and investigate the source of the disturbance. The scene changes into the forest, where a giant cardboard was about to fall on them, and they were running to escape. After a while, he stopped, and he realized he was working at the house at the time. He then remembered to enter the house and cook the meat, noting that cooking had become much easier thanks to the store he had set up. Even though he was just grilling the meat, it was still a significant improvement. The first floor had a kitchen and dining room spacious enough for everyone to gather and eat together. He mentioned that cooking while enjoying the view of the surrounding vegetation seemed so peaceful. Ko, attracted by the smell, asked Tenno if he could taste grilled meat. Tenno understood and gave him a little piece, telling him it was a real delight. As Ko proved, he was delighted with the taste. The others, seeing his reaction, asked for a piece as well. Tenno agreed and was about to give them some when he noticed Chai standing away. He called him, asking why he was standing and being so quiet. Chi, a part of the group, was also going to be offered some meat. Chi, surprised, wanted to know if it was really all right for him to have some. Shine reassured him, saying that it was a wise decision by his master to share with him. Karu added that if Chi wanted more, he could join the next hunt. Surprised, Chi asked if that offer was really for him, and with a smile, he agreed to join them. They all liked the grilled meat, and Tenno suggested that maybe next time he should use 2 stoves to grill the meat more efficiently. Then he showered, feeling completely relaxed. As he reflected on how he managed to heat the water using magic, he commented that magic was really the best. Until recently, he always trusted in clean magic to deal with the dirt, but as a Japanese, he could not go without a proper bath. Although he didn't have soup this time, he was still able to clean up. There were still many things he wanted. He had gone through a lot of effort to make everything work, and wanted to share the experience with everyone, even if he felt that everyone was getting more feudal lately. He wondered if they would still be able to fit. After that, he created something like a bathroom, and he couldn't help feeling emotional. He had lost so much. He remembered earlier when he had hidden in the woods to avoid the wolves, and somehow Ko had caught him, saying it was dangerous to go alone. As Ko followed, Tenno assured him that he would not worry, as everything would be fine. He stopped remembering, noting that such things would no longer happen, so while he sat in the bathroom, he noted that since he had discovered that he could knead stones with magic, he made sure to be meticulous. It ended like the real thing, complete with a sink, and even the automatic cleaning function made him marvel at the wonders of magic. Ko heard a noise and came to see Tenno, just to surprise him in the process. Ko stood outside with a red face, and the others wondered what had happened. Ko hesitated before mentioning the diet, confessing that he had accidentally spied on his master in a helpless state, and feared Tenno might now hate him. Tenno, fun, suggested that he install a door, noting that he was very pleased with the bathroom he had created. In fact, he had made one for each floor. While practicing his magic, he had also created something unexpected, silver ore, which was difficult to handle with magic. He was surprised to discover that it extended, and I wanted to know how far it could go. The chief, seeing this, commented in disbelief, saying that it was hard to believe that Tenno was channeling magic through Mithril. Tenno continued to stretch it, and soon discovered that the light was passing through it, revealing that it was more like a kind of glass. He sat down, reflecting that it looked good even after he made it quite thin. Curious, he decided to try to insert the material into some rock windows. He ended up opening wide windows on each floor, thinking that he might also want some wooden floors, as he had a lot of materials at his disposal. He then went into the forest to find a giant tree. Observing that it was the straightest tree around, and it seemed nice and tall, he remembered to watch on a TV that drying wood was essential for processing, but in fact it took several years. So he decided to use magic to cut the branches first, and then peel the shell. Tenno found the wood of good quality, so it was time to turn it into boards. To do that, he used wind magic, and quickly finished the process, but he forgot to cut the base. And now the boards were about to fall upon them. The scene changed back to the present, where he noticed that next time he would definitely cut the base after he knocked down the tree. Now he needed to transport the boards to the front of the base. Using instant motion, he teleported to the 4th floor, which was the 4th. After informing the others, he decided to start the flooring process. At first he thought that flooring was just a matter of putting up some boards, and it would be an easy task. However, while he was working, he quickly realized there were gaps, and the thickness of the board was inconsistent. In addition, the boards were very heavy and large, even with instant movement allowing you to make precise adjustments. His ideal floating board technique ended up making a mess. Thinking again, he realized that relying on solid floors could lead to problems later. Sitting, he sighed, noting that there was still much work to do. He decided to change his approach, and wanted him to have a suitable tool to slowly scrape the boards. The stone in his hand was too hard to use for that purpose, so he decided to make a tool out of the silver ore. He stretched the metal to make it thinner, then molded it into what looked like a proper blade. After sharpening it, he tested its edge and thought it was quite effective. Ko, who was watching the whole process, was visibly impressed. Tenno also noticed that while the rocky mountain was not exactly soft, he would have to be extremely careful when handling the blade. The rocky mountains were surprisingly flexible when magic passed through them, which he found very interesting. He began to wonder if he could make a pot. He wanted something other than meat, a different kind of food, something more than that. While he kept thinking, his mind wandered to door hinges, and he started making a doll. He mentioned that the windows would be able to open, and he might as well add some hinges to the entrance to the 4th floor. The doll he raised turned out to be quite beautiful. He did a few more, commenting that it's been a long time since he played with clay, and it was so much fun. The stones he used seemed to shine, and he wanted to know if he could do it so that only his eyes would shine. After completing his creations, he fell asleep without realizing. The next morning, he woke up and decided to let Ko sleep a little longer. When he got up, he noticed that the woods had been properly arranged, and the foundations were in place. To his surprise, the dolls he had made were moving on their own, working together to organize the wood and build the floor. Tenno and the wolves watched, and the wolves turned to look at him. He was confused. There were 9 of the dolls, all made of the stone walls he had made the night before. He couldn't understand how they had come to life. Then he remembered a fairy tale he had heard as a child, where elves secretly made shoes in the middle of the night. I even wanted the floor to be finished while he was sleeping, and I wanted to know if that's why it had been completed. He found out that one of the dolls was still there, and he wondered if it wasn't moving because he hadn't formed a clear image in his mind by creating it. So he asked everyone to stop work and gather in front of him. Suddenly they stopped working, and to his surprise gathered at his command. Then he instructed the last one, calling him the auxiliary robot, and said to simply move. Then the final doll began to move, and Tenno felt immense happiness in sight. Tenno mentioned that he was leaving the task to all of them, and then he observed how they resumed their work. He wondered how quickly and orderly they worked. It was already 5, and they had finished so quickly. Everything while they kept themselves organized and clean. They were also very cute. The wolves, however, were shocked to see the dolls, and began to refer to them as golems, were visibly upset, and one of the wolves asked Ko if these were the same types of weapons that humans used to attack the forest. Ko asked everyone to calm down. Tenno understood that the wolves were afraid of the stone dolls at first, but he hoped that, in time, they would get used to them and start getting along. Tenno asked the dolls to make the floor on the second and third floors in the same style, and they received some free time. That's why he decided to go back to exploring the forest, went out with the wolves, who told him they would bring a lot of meat. However, Sod had a different plan and decided to find some vegetables and spices. They kept going forward, and Tenno noticed that the fog from before seemed to take longer. He continued purifying the area while walking, though the source of the curse seemed to be where the light floated. He was continually sending back the curse. He wondered what would happen to the other side. No matter what, they would reap what they sowed. He mentioned that compared to when he arrived, the forest was getting brighter, so he asked Ko if it had been originally like this. Tenno noticed fruit hanging from a tree. It was the first time he saw something like that. He wondered if it was edible. He stopped, wondering if he could climb the tree. Although the fruit was right in front of him, he couldn't reach it. Just then Chief jumped. Jumping into the tree and starting to climb, Tenno smiled, happy to see that he was able to do it. Then he noticed the other 8 also climbing the tree. After a closer inspection, he realized they had no wings. He wondered if they were the fighters, but he thought had only known them a week ago, and they were growing up so fast. He hoped he was imagining. But Ko and the others were also getting much bigger. He was currently about 185 centimeters tall. He then noticed that the spiders were carrying something, and wondered how they did it. He held the fruit, wondering if he could eat it, as it had a tasty bright red color. There were signs that the fallen fruit had already been eaten by animals. He cut the fruit with the sharp object in his hand, and took a bite, just to find out it was incredibly delicious. He even shed a tear, saying that after so long, taste something sweet was a completely different experience. The fruit was crispy, it tasted like peach, and it was ripe and delicious. He gave some to the spiders and to Ko. After that, they collected all the fruit. He mentioned that he had accidentally taken more than he intended, but he wondered what he should do with them. Even after forcing them to enter, the bag could only hold one. He wanted the bag to work like the pocket of a certain robot. He kept putting the fruit in the bag. Amazing that so many could fit. Magic was really outrageous. On the way back, he collected more edible items, while the wolves hunted a boar and finally brought him back with them. Tenno mentioned that they were back, and then asked Heyo if anyone had been hurt, saying that he had brought back a great load. Heyo asked him to look at himself and Soha, who had caught more. Tenno told them that first they should clean up, and then he put all the fruits and vegetables, saying he had brought many without salt, but with these, his diet would certainly improve. He then began to prepare the prey, saying had cut a cut to drain the blood, and then use the wind to skin him. He did it and cut the meat. Preparing to eat, the wolves were eager to dig. Tenno mentioned that his guts were a little further out, and apologized to them, but he asked them to eat everything. While Ko and the others were eating, He was sharing meat for himself, and for storage, Shine commented that the meat Tenno had prepared was so clean and easy to eat, and that it was the best. Karu commented that there was too much liver that day. Tenno replied that the front of the house might be getting tight, and if he had some salt, he would make ham and other things. He also wanted to know how to tan the skin. He was using the refrigerated warehouse on the first floor of the basement, but the vegetable storage area would need tables to calm down the products, which would not work for now. He decided to think of a solution later. While the meat was being cooked, Corinne was drawn to her. Tenno approached, commenting that it was well cooked, and thanked Karen for it, saying he preferred to eat cooked meat. He also described a vegetable with a slight sweetness, something between cabbage and lettuce despite being raw, with soft interiors. He mentioned a sour fruit with a refreshing smell, even if it was vividly green. And as it was lightly squeezed upon the grilled meat, he made the dish, and when he took a bite, he said it was nice and warm, with a soft sweetness that spread in his mouth. The acidity also added an extra layer of flavor. He even mentioned it was delicious, although it was still the usual meat, and he wanted to have some sauce to go with him. It reminded him that, besides Karen, everyone had gathered, and he wanted to know what had happened to the chief. Over 3 days, the floor to the upper floors was completed. He was happy that the dolls had handled all the heavy work, even the kitchen. As it was important, he decided to improve further, asked them to build a picture measuring 200 and 60 and wondered if they could do it, so he went to the chief, thinking that now, with the food and house installed, there was only one thing to do. He noticed the chief was getting bigger and commented that, as expected, it was a little scary. Chief spoke in his own language, asking Tenno to look at his body and explain that, thanks to the generous amount of Tenno mana had spilled on him, he had recovered so much. He mentioned that his children were unable to contain their feelings of gratitude. Tenno also needed a great deal of mana for the barrier and the golems. And the chief continued to provide mana for them and for the forest. Sometimes Tenno cared about him. As Tenno approached, he wondered if the chief was trying to convey something. He thought that in fact the chief seemed to have intelligence. And at least he knew the chief was friendly. Tenno then mentioned that he had something to ask. Boss, the clothes he always wore were beginning to wear, even if he was casting a clean spell on them daily. He noticed that, as spiders, they must be good with business, although he never saw the chief break something like that. Tenno really wanted new clothes. He then spoke of the trade, asking if the chief knew of any plants he could harvest. That lasted longer. Since chief did not answer, Tenno wondered if he even understood. He then decided to go out with the chief, Chi, and Karu. Tenno explained that he had only brought Chi and Karu because Ko was not around, and then he told both of them that he was counting on them. Both growled, and Karu in his language said that it was unexpected for them to be trusted with this task. She agreed, saying that it did not seem that Tenno really needed them. He thought it was a good opportunity to show Ko, who was always worried about Che's strengths. He told Tenno that he would do his best to meet his master's expectations. Tenno called for Chief, asking if he was there, and then they saw the giant caterpillars. The wolves were shocked, while the chief was there. Tenno wondered if anything had happened to him. He then left the caterpillar, and said that perhaps he was able to fulfill his wish. Karu and Chi, however, were skeptical. They pointed out that those were his magical beasts that carried deadly poison. Chief assured them that until they provoked the caterpillars, they would be fine and that he could handle it. Then the caterpillar reached out to take Tenno's hand. What shocked the chief and the others, the chief asked what the caterpillar was doing. Tenno, a little scared, said he really scared him, but he thought for a moment that the caterpillar was attracting him. It was different than he imagined, but it seemed durable and usable. He gave it to the chief. The chief mentioned that for a moment he was prepared to burn to death the Tenno barrier. Karu and Chi were confused, expressing that there was no help now. Tenno then asked the chief how many larvae they could bring with them. They put one in Karu and one in Chai, and when they were coming back, The boss said the caterpillars wouldn't spit poison, explained clearly so they could trust him. Tenno apologized to the wolves for it. When they met Ko was surprised to see Chai gathering the insects again. Tenno, in response, embraced Ko warmly, receiving him. As she was about to say something to Ko interrupted, saying that he was just joking. As always, Chi had such a lovely reaction. Tenno entered the house, thinking that he had discovered something while working in the bathroom and refrigerator. It seemed that some magic could be incorporated into the rocks, giving them a persistent effect. He also had a strategy to avoid soiling the floor using automatic cleaning. He decided to turn the second floor, which he wasn't using, for the breeding rooms and install a ventilation window too. He then put some leaves and food, which was needed, and put the caterpillars in them, saying that now he just needed someone in charge of taking care of them, as he couldn't do it alone. When he made the stone dolls and told them they would take care of the caterpillars, the caterpillars were scared. Tenno was surprised because the dolls were so cute. And yet the caterpillars were scared of them, so the work thread seemed to be going well, and Tenno began to think about what would be a good way to make fabric. He took off his shirt to give to the dolls for examination. They started discussing something, and Tenno wondered if they had found a solution. It seemed they weren't going to make a bed immediately. One of the dolls took him to show the bed, and he was so excited, mentioning that he was even better than he had imagined. He said it was amazing that in just half a day they had succeeded, and now he was closer to having a civilized lifestyle. He was looking forward to the night. At night everyone slept by the bed. Tenno lay in it, thinking he was beginning to understand the value of a bed now. The work of the stone dolls was surprising. The next day he was surprised, wondering if it had really been a stone wall the day before, now had completely transformed. Even with stylish furniture that he had seen online before, the food was served to him, and everything was prepared, chopsticks, water, and everything. When he began to eat, he marveled at the consideration that everything seemed, noting that the meal and water were twice as good as usual. He noticed there were only 8 dolls, with the other 2 in the caterpillar room. He wore the new light green shirt, paired with black pants. The smooth fabric looked exactly silky. He mentioned, half cheerfully, not to tell anyone that, depending on what they ate, the color of his costume changed. Finally, he was relieved to have many orb-shaped underwear, even if it was a little embarrassing when they inspected them. He saw a sewing machine, one that remembered watching on TV a long time ago, and wondered if they had done it themselves. It was really impressive. He thought to himself it was time for a change of pace. He decided to go to the woods with Ko, Cheyenne and Heyo, feeling that the search would be fruitful that same day. Already he was beginning to crave some spice. Tenno had only 1 stone left, and hoped there would be more rock salt or something nearby. He wanted to know if the world had any oceans. As they advanced, they discovered another cave. Tenno noted that, although he had not been in this area before, it was better that a big roll was relatively close to his home. He noticed a mild decline inside and felt uncomfortable, feeling the presence of a curse or something. He lit a little flame and instructed the wolves to stand guard. "Let's go inside," he said. They ventured deeper into the cave, to find a wild path that led further down. As they moved, they heard sounds from within, and as they advanced, they reached a large open area. That's when they came face to face with a colony of massive ants. Tenno was shocked, but Ko immediately loaded forward, eager for battle. Tenno realized that it was not time to stand by and watch. He activated his purification ability. It had no effect, so he tried to use a barrier, but the ants kept moving towards him, who quickly intervened, blocking the ants and throwing them away. Tenno went back to his feet, but the ants kept getting closer. He felt a sinister sensation of black patterns in ant bodies, which filled him with discomfort. They were still inside the barrier, surrounded by ants, and the creatures seemed to be fighting to cross, though the barrier was holding. Tenno didn't know what to do. The purification technique wasn't working, and he got confused about his next step. Did you think of the black patterns in the bodies of the ants, and remember the first time you met the wolves? when you noticed a similar black mist around you? Could it be that their bodies had been completely taken by a curse? If so, perhaps an exorcism will help. The ants continued to attack from above, but the barrier still protected him. Tenno murmured that he was not good. As he struggled to form a clear image in his mind, he wondered if it was possible that there were two different beings in a body, like someone being possessed. He imagined a state where the real selves of the ants were connected and unable to free themselves. Then he understood what was happening and declared that the curse linking his spirits would be broken by him. With determination, he used his power to release the call, releasing all the ants. The scene reminded him of a dark chapter of the past when the forest had been consumed by black magic, the rivers had disappeared, and the fruits had become poisonous. The king of the forest, who once ruled and protected, had disappeared when the forest curse was lifted. No one had been able to reach the human world. Shocked by the sudden appearance of the new monsters, Tenno saw how the forest had been swallowed up by darkness once again, the sight of the dark ants as dark magic wrapped around his body. He wondered if, in time, he would be reduced to nothing but another creature that would harm the forest. But no, he could not allow it. As one of the kings of the forest, he refused to let such fate happen to him. He summoned the dragon from the water of the forest, who ruled all the worlds, seeking his help. The scene returned to the present, where Tenno put his hand on an ant's head, reassuring everything. The surface seemed soft and cold to the touch, but then the ant suddenly moved, and Tenno wondered what was going on. Ko called the ant, asking if he was in Furumi, noting that his presence seemed so different that Ko didn't even recognize him. The ant, however, recognized Ko as King Fenrir. The ants released them, and Tenno thanked them before following them. He thought about what Ko had said, that everything was fine, and noticed that they were already following the ants 30 minutes ago. He wondered if it was really okay, though. He felt that the leader of the ants was similar to his boss, and it didn't look bad. Finally, they reached a place. Tenno used his magic of light to scan the area, and discovered the black curse that remained there. Ko asked, could this really be the water dragon dwelling? The ants answered affirmatively, explaining that Burwa had been a beautiful sacred lake, overflowing with rich magic. Tenno realized that, as he feared, it was too late for the lake, feeling a wave of determination. Tenno used his abilities of absorption and purification of the curse, thinking that there could be other creatures around the rocky mountain that had been taken and were suffering like the ant. He felt the curse spreading throughout the forest, and swore to send the broken curse back twice as strong. So he released the link through the entire forest, a movement that shocked Ko. Once Tenno had completed the purification, they reached the lake. The view was breathtaking, and the ant felt the purifying power at work, healing and restoring his strength. Tenno stretched his body, feeling the tension, and reflected. The search for spice unexpectedly turned into this, so he suggested, let's continue the hunt. The ant followed him, and Tenno was surprised by his actions. As they moved on, he noticed a fruit within reach, and thought it was strange but familiar. Curious, he chose him, wondering if he was edible, sniffing him, but couldn't detect any smell. When he took a bite, he was immediately struck by his intense protrusion. The flavor he dreamed of. He turned to Ko and said, we should take as much as we can and go home quickly. Meanwhile, Miss Lost and a group of knights were investigating the forest. However, they weren't feeling well, and they were moving slowly, some of them even fainting from the tension. The scene changes half a month ago in the castle, where Miss. He had just returned from the forest the day before, and now he had to conduct another research. He wondered if the king wanted him to die for overwork. The players told him to leave, and that he would pretend not to have heard anything Miss. Lost then mentioned how those people made so much noise when Varda's magic stone broke, but after a full inspection, it was nothing serious. Normally, the monster's magic stones were the size of a fingertip, and compared to that, the castle's magic stone was huge. That little scratch was nothing to worry about, gamers agreed, saying it was true, and even the records showed that the magic stone had been filled with cracks when it was discovered. Miss. However, he noticed that this time it was different from other research, and if there really was a problem, they would have to solve it in the best way they could. From the beginning, the Fourth Chivalric Order had been a unit with vast experience in the forest. Founded to capture and subjugate monsters, serving the forest also became one of his duties. He thought to himself that he had been in the forest countless times, but honestly, nothing happened. It was just a useful, dark place. He mentioned that if the research turned out to be normal, it should mean there was nothing wrong. The players asked if it was like that, and if anything could be happening in the middle of the forest. Miss Lost sighed and replied that gamers could not be suggesting that the kings of the forest were there. Gamers didn't even know what to say, and was afraid to react. Mrs. Lost asked what she was afraid of, ensuring that it was difficult to reach the energy of the forest with all the monsters overflowing due to the evil eye. But even if something came up, it wouldn't mean the strongest kingdom in the world would lose. The players expected it to be the case. As Miss Lost prepared to leave, a bottle was passed by the slaves of the camp, who were assigned to scout and do chores. Only a few were going, as it usually took those 10 days to get to the forest. The boy agreed to leave too. Miss Lost was curious about why gamers seemed so concerned. A man then asked if something had happened to the commander of the First Order. Among the gentlemanly orders, gamers was the only one who barely used slaves. From the moment they were born, Anvilus slaves were connected with the powerful slave crest, making them unable to feel emotions or even think independently. They could not speak without receiving an order. Nanga had much worse, but even if it was easier not to think of them, Lost didn't see them as anything but slaves. The man agreed, adding that although he felt the same way, he felt that the treatment of the fifth commander was a bit cruel. Mrs. Lost added that no matter how they approached, sacrificing so many people to the magic stone was unacceptable. However, he stopped, suggesting that they forget. The man said he didn't hate that part of Lost. Mrs. Lost asked if the man was making fun of him. The scene changed to Gamers, who was writing a letter. Reflecting on what Miss Lost said earlier, the players did not believe that and even if they claimed that the Fourth Order of Cavalry was familiar with the forest, at best, they had only covered less than 10% of it. The forest has taken half the world, and no one has ever reached its center for hundreds of years since the magic was cast, and to this day there have been reports of retaliation of the kings of the forest. However, beyond the strong barrier of the forest, people said that no power capable of affecting the magic stone existed. Moreover, since the discovery of the stone, it should have been strengthened by the countless sacrifices offered to it. The players then wondered if an existence that surpassed the kings of the forest had appeared there. The scene changed to half a month later, where they had pushed their swords on him, finally killing him. The knights were pleased with his victory, but Lost told them to leave him. The man beside him also observed that something seemed strange. Lost agreed, pointing out that it had been half a month since they entered the forest, but the number of monsters was abnormally low. The man waved, adding that it made only 4 encounters so far, while under normal circumstances they would have found at least 10 now. Lost noticed that all the creatures they'd encountered so far had been one of the best magical beasts in the kingdom. These creatures should be modified to attack only the natural inhabitants of the forest. He regretted not bringing a magician with them, as they could not properly assess the situation on their own. A strange feeling dragged upon him, and as he listened, he heard a rustling noise among the trees, accompanied by a dark, sinister presence. He wondered what was happening in the forest. Someone assured him that they were still on their way, and that it should be the same forest as ever, but Lost couldn't forget the feeling. There was an unusual cleansing in the air, a discomfort different from before, and a feeling of fear slowly penetrating his body. The others seemed to be feeling something strange too. Lost wondered if they were reaching their limits, so suggested they take a salt brick. he called to the recon unit. By ordering them to move on, check for dangerous creatures, and come back in an hour. When they left, Miss Lost thought they still had a long way to go. If there was no danger, they would soon set up camp at their current location. He ordered 5 people from the slave unit to take turns guarding for 6 hours each, while the rest of them prepared the camp. Others hesitated to camp there and miss, and as they performed their tasks, Mrs. Lost thought to himself that if he couldn't get the squad back into their senses, they could do something rash. The slaves didn't experience things like fear, and Mrs. Lost wondered if that was normal, considering they had no emotions since birth. A man then informed him that there were no threats in the area since the slaves had sharp senses, with good noses and ears. They should be fine for now. Mrs. Lost was about to respond when a flash of light appeared in the sky. They all froze in shock. And miss. The thought was lost that it seemed that a light had passed away, but there was no aggression, and no one had fallen, so a loud cry echoed. And they saw the ground shining. Who left the guards in shock. Miss Lost regained control of himself, preparing for an ambush. After everything that happened, everyone was unconscious. They wondered what had happened. Miss Lost speculated if they had been attacked by the king of the forest. But it seemed that everyone who had fainted simply fainted, and no one seemed to be hurt. A man approached him, informing him that the slaves had disappeared. Mrs. Lost was shocked and wondered if everyone had been annihilated. The man denied it, saying it looked like they'd fled alone. Mrs. Lost was surprised to hear that, and wanted to know if the crest had been broken. He knew he would have to report it to the king. Tenno was walking with the creature, and told him that once he was joining them, he should have a name. Observing his scarlet-red body, he decided to call him Shuri. Shuri became emotional upon receiving a name. When they got home, Karu commented that their master was late, and they didn't like to stay home with the dolls. Ko asked what had happened. Karu explained that he was returning from a hunting trip, bringing the prey as usual to his master's room, but when the dolls saw him, they kicked him with the most angry look had ever seen. It was the scariest thing, so Shuri showed up, and Karu was shocked to see. Mentioning the guard of hell in disbelief, the chief arrived, asking why Shuri was with his master. Shuri replied that it is what they should be asking, why they were there. It was clear that the two shared a deep rivalry. Tenno, seeing the tension, asked them not to fight, as they were both in bad terms. Shuri reluctantly agreed to cooperate, and the boss said they'd never see fit. However, if Tenno could prove Shuri's worth, none of them would have to lose their home. Ko found it impressive how Tenno, with his power, managed to gather two races that could normally never coexist. It reminded him of the situation with Phoenix, and as things had been for them, he entered the room and noticed that even the ceiling had been completed. The dolls called him, and he realized that they had already used all the boards and square wood. He also remembered that he had something important to do the next day. After picking fruit, he reflected that much had happened, but now it was time to make the salt he always wanted to create. He wasn't sure if it would work, so he decided to use about 5 fruits this time and leave the rest in storage. In the past, he had tried to throw vegetables into storage, trying something vague like a time suspension spell. Looking at the fruits now, he thought it had ended very well. First, they covered the silver ore bowl with a thin cloth, and with all their strength, they squeezed the juice. He reminded them to boil carefully to avoid burning. There was still some liquid, so he coursed again. After 2 hours of hard work, he finally managed to make some salt. He ran away, declaring that something so special deserved his own special vessel. He filled up some containers, commenting that he had ended up turning all the fruit into salt. The thought of being able to turn these hard gold ores into impressive containers made him excited. Not only the silver one, but the ability to freely manipulate gold, once dense with magic, was something that would have been impossible even for him in the past. He gave it all for half a day, and at night it was time to enjoy delicious meat. While cooking, I sprinkled some salt and scented herbs on thawed steaks and let them rest for a minute. Ko watched him, and Tenno apologized, saying that salt was something he would not share with them. He kept grilling the meat over the fire, wishing to have a frying pan or a Dutch oven, as well as a little oil. The lard could be made of pork fat, and although he had only seen on TV, he was improvising. After grilling, he rolled the steaks into thick leaves to let them rest a little. For the final touch, he donated the exterior again. When he was ready, he was about to take a bite when two wolves began to approach the flesh. Tenno, enjoying the taste, drew his food and told the wolves that his portions were already prepared outside, reminded them that it was salty, so they could not eat it. Still, he gave them some, and assured them that he wasn't trying to feed everyone with something weird. He also gave Karen some. When you looked around, you realized Karen wasn't there, and he saw her flying into the sky. He kept waiting for her to come back the next day, but she didn't come back. Although she was a strange bird and must be fine, he couldn't help but worry. She was small and vulnerable, and there was always the risk of being attacked by a dangerous beast. Ko spoke in his own language, telling Tenno that if he was worried about Karen, it was unnecessary. For someone who had been closest to him, Karen should have acquired an enormous amount of magic now. Actually, Karen wasn't regaining more power than Ko. Tenno hugged Ko, crying and wondering if Ko was worried about him too, so he asked not to leave him while he hugged Ko. He thought that once he calmed down a little, he should find something to distract himself. A while ago, he had tried to tan, but it had been very difficult. Initially, he thought it would be a good way to remove the meat and fat, but when he tried to use magic for the task, it came out the backbone. He was terrible at adjusting the process and ended up making a big hole with the knife. After fighting to get the meat out, every time I tried to wash the dirty parts, the water became black and the belt hardened and began to smell. Finally, after all that, they reached their biggest obstacle, drying. It was always here that things went wrong. No matter what he did, the leather would harden, and nothing seemed to change him back. As expected, as he didn't know enough about tanning, he couldn't figure out what was causing it. He then fed Ko, saying it was the last rinse. He thought that while he had the fur, he could make a bed or a rug, but if he also had the leather, he could create things like shoes or accessories. It seemed that his goals were expanding. One of the wolves wondered what Tenno had done lately. Ko replied that it did not seem to be related to eating, while the wolves returned with the prey. Tenno greeted them, telling them to wait a moment. Compared to before, everyone was eating much more, and there was much to do. The chief also brought his prey, showing that he had gone hunting too. Tenno understood that since Shuri arrived, the boss seemed to be growing competitive, and he wondered how great the animals of this world could grow. Even the size of Ko was comparable to a small car. So Tenno mentioned that once they had made the salt, they should also try to make ham. After a while, he realized that he had accidentally left his skin soaked since the day before. When he checked, the water had turned into a muddy brown. He pulled the hair out, wondering if it could still be good if it dried up in the air. After a while, he noticed that the skin was getting softer than usual. Reflecting on that, he wondered if it was due to leaving him in that special pot he rarely used. He decided to gather the same kind of tree and try to extract it through boiling. However, as he was doing it, he wasn't sure if it would work. He gave the dolls the name Shiki, commenting that it was a beautiful name. Shuri was moving, noting that he knew he was the master who had created all the dolls. Tenno reminded him that until now he was referring to the miners as one eye and three eyes. He then asked for an eye to bring 3 pieces of skin that had been frozen in advance, explaining that he would take the tanning process to them. The dolls worked fast, and Tenno was impressed. He commented that they were experiencing different concentrations. Stretch the skin so that it would not shrink so much during drying. He thought to himself that despite having created them, they seemed much more skilled than he was. Tenno then asked if they wanted to try more tasks, but it seemed that they had run out of room in front of the house. He had always left wood collection for an eye, and wanted to know if he should start cleaning more space. When he looked at a large log that had fallen, he observed that it seemed to be over a few hundred years old, The thought that all these trunks came from such a massive tree made him feel a little guilty. Ko showed him a tree and asked him in his own language if they should cut it. Tenno wondered if it was okay. As they were still cutting trees, he would need to process the wood from the cut ends, and then move it to the third floor and the first basement. He noticed the dolls taking out the logs, realizing they were still doing something. Had cut a lot of trees and felt like had cleaned more than enough for the day. When he was coming home, he decided to stop for a day, so a doll showed him a relaxing chair, and to his surprise, it was a hanging chair. Something he wanted in high school. The details were so precise that it was almost disturbing. He noticed that they also built a bathroom using wood, and even the stairs had a handrail with wooden steps, complete with small non-slip accessories. However, the bathroom door was still missing. He couldn't help but think that when Karen came back, the changes would certainly shock her. The scene changed for Karen, who was sitting near the lake Tenno had. The next day, Tenno realized he needed to decide what to do with the stump field, but to his surprise, all the stones disappeared. He noticed that the ants were busy taking the remaining pieces of useless logs to their den. He walked towards the lair, waving with approval while observing his work, thinking to himself that it was exactly as expected of them. Shuri came out of the den to greet him, and added that the lair was now much more comfortable than the lair of Ida-Nassen. Tenno understood that Shuri was inviting him, but he politely refused, apologizing for not being able to enter. As he looked around, he saw that the ants were digging on the ground, removing the stumps, and plow the field with remarkable efficiency. Inspired, Tenno decided that he could create a suitable field here. It would save him the trouble of constantly searching for vegetables. The land was small enough to support it, and he thought it would be manageable. Tenno wondered if the potatoes would grow well on the ground. He asked Shuri if she knew of any vegetables that could thrive there, grow on the ground, and be eaten. After Shuri left, Tenno told Shiki that if they were to grow the field, they would need to make their own organic fertilizer. He explained that his old man used to take him to the fields, so he knew how to do it. He enlisted Shika's help to start preparing the farm. He explained that he would mount a corner of the field under the shadow of a tree, dig a hole, and then erect a wooden frame. He planned to alternate between burying leftovers of food, dead leaves, and dead grass. After that, he sprinkled a little water to speed up the fermentation process. Once it spread the water, all that was left to do was wait. When he thought about it, he decided to open a container full of compound. The moment he did, a swarm of insects appeared instantly, which caught him by surprise. He wondered how it happened. He then tried to speed up the process, hoping to turn the place into a magical storage space for vegetables to help with that. He made sure that water vapor was born from the ground, producing an aromatic smell. After digging the ground again and mixing it, it even increased the mixture. Meanwhile, the wolves were chasing a boar, and Ko managed to bite him, kill him. He mentioned it's been a while since he had enjoyed such a good hunt. Only then, Ko noticed something flying in the sky and wondered what it was. He told Shiki that the current configuration should be good enough for now. The temperature was hot, and they could leave it as it was for now. Suddenly, a giant bird appeared before him. He wondered if it was Karen. As Karen approached him, Tenno said to wait. Suddenly Karen began to cry. Tenno was surprised and quickly explained that it was not what Karen thought. However, he was also happy, realizing that Karen was not only safe, but had become even more beautiful. Ko, who came to investigate, recognized it was Karen. Karen, in her own language, asked for help with a beast, explaining that her powers were not enough to deal with it. Tenno saw the creature, who looked like a softball with wings, and felt a curse on her. He used purification magic on the beast. As the curse dissipated, Ko asked if it was the water dragon. Karen replied saying that the forest would certainly be revitalized now. Ko reminded them that among kings, a divine beast race presided over the 5 elements that make up the forest, the dragons. For many years, they protected the forest from human invasion, but suddenly they disappeared without a trace. If the water dragon were still alive, It meant that the water in the forest would have remained pure. Karen agreed, believing the same. The return of dragon power would surely rejuvenate the forest. Karen then told Ko that he intended to seek out the other dragons and bring them back to Tenno's side. Ko suggested that, considering Karen's mobility, it would be better for Karen to deal with the search. While Ko would take responsibility for Tenno's safety, Karen replied that he did not believe their master needed Ko's protection. Tenno was looking at the water dragon, marveling at his beautiful blue shoe, looked like a soft, hairy ball. And as expected from this world, he wondered if he was really alive, so he wondered why it looked so. Karen had no idea, but Ko, speaking in his tongue, confirmed that the presence within her was undeniably that of a water dragon. Tenno caressed the creature, observing how soft she was, and decided to name it Fluffy. Ko was surprised that his master named the water dragon, but Karen agreed, saying it was a good name. Tenno knew that Fluffy liked the name. Only then he heard some sounds and realized that Shan and the others had returned. He saw Cheyenne carrying a much larger prey the size of Cheyenne himself, which was surprising. Cheyenne proudly declared that he had caught a great prey. Tenno noticed Cheyenne's tail swinging rapidly and commented that he seemed more satisfied than normal, looking particularly happy at the time. Tenno thought about how, recently, he had found several creatures, first the spider's quick creature, then the bird, and now this mysterious creature. He guessed that wolves should be happy too, especially because it was another world. Lately, it seemed like his abilities were constantly improving, and he appreciated the work of the wolves. Since Karen came back, they've decided to have a banquet. Tenno began to cut the meat, noting that he was getting used to cutting the heart too, not that he wanted to eat it. When he cut, he discovered a stone next to the pre's heart and wondered if it was a sign of disease or just a lump. While he examined further, he found several of these stones, however, not all the prey had them. What made you wonder if they were always inside, or if something else was at stake? He tried to purify the stones, but he didn't notice any changes. In conclusion, they were not cursed. He decided to ignore them, and turned his attention to the objects that the dolls had made. Tenno then said Ko there was something he wanted to try to do that day. First, they prepared a silver ore tray. Then they gathered all the stones, rolled them up, organized them on the platform, and the assembly was complete. The mountain stones were easy to shape and had the special property of storing the effects of the last magic cast on them. In addition, they were resistant to heat. Who gave Tenno an idea he could use them for a barbecue, imagining the properties of coal. He heated the stones he had placed in the container made by the dolls. Then he took long sticks and stuck vegetables and meat in them to cook. So he mentioned he needed to stick the ingredients using a gold ore stick. He was used to grilling on a stove. But now he realized that the shape of the grid was also important. Looking at Karen's face, he said to wait, ensuring that the food would be ready soon, recently, until the boss started eating cooked meat, while Ko and the others continued to eat it raw. Only then did Ko approach, attracted by the smell of meat. Tenno wondered if he had finished eating what was inside and decided to give him some. He also wanted to know if Fluffy could eat meat. When he saw Fluffy eat without hesitation, he considered adding some salt and lemon juice to his own portion. How he took a bite. He thought it was delicious. Maybe he should make more kitchenware, and a good sauce to accompany the meat seemed like a great idea too. He began to think of ways to create them. As he pondered, he realized that those stones did not seem strange. Maybe he can imbue them with magic. He gave it a try, and to his astonishment, magic flowed through the stones instantly. Until now, the most practical material to conduct magic was the stones of the stone mountain, but once their stored magic was exhausted, they lost the effect. He was also worried about the bathroom not cleaning the waste properly. Looking at the stone, he wondered if it could be used for that purpose too. However, he needed to test it. It seemed that the more magical power he imbued in the stone, the greater his ability to store energy. Tenno noticed that the color of the stone had changed, now a vibrant green like a jewel. He wondered if the same thing happened to the other stones, and found that each one changed in a different color. It seemed that color change depended on the kind of monster. The moment the color stopped changing also varied, depending on how much magic was spilled. The stones were beautiful, but Tenno still didn't know how to use them, thought to sell them for a lot of money. Though he lamented that there was no one around to buy them. He saw Ko looking at the stones, and Tenno wondered what was wrong. Ko deeply inhaled and released shocking fire Tenno. He wanted to know if this was magic. Tenno had thought Ko could use magic, but he didn't expect this sudden display. Ko then took a red stone. He surrounded himself with fire and launched an explosion. Tenno was stunned and confused. As Ko reached another stone, Tenno realized what was going on. He still didn't understand what Ko was trying to show him, but it seemed that Ko would continue to manifest until Tenno understood. Tenno began to suspect that the stones could amplify magical attacks. He decided to test it using the water in a glass. He concentrated on the water and noticed that the amount of water changed, with some being dragged out while others were drained into the surrounding water. Only then, Shuri arrived and Tenno received him. Looking at the situation, Tenno realized, almost without noticing, that he had obtained a very convenient item. It was only later that he would discover his true use. Shuri offered something to eat, telling Tenno to have fun too. Tenno wondered if they could eat at all. The ants watched him, and Shuri explained that these things could even be uncooked food. Tenno tried with the meat and found them delicious. Shuri then gave some to Tenno, encouraging him to try. Tenno agreed, but suggested that they leave him in the sun for now, as he planned for the field first. Shuri asked where he was going, and then the chief arrived, saying that these things were not to his master's preference. Tenno went to the field, asking the dolls when they would finish farming. Thanks to the help of the ants, it was much easier for them to dig. He needed to mix the compound he had made before on the ground, and continue cultivating the land with it. He had never made compost for himself before, so he wasn't sure if it would work, but he decided to give it a try. Taking the axe, he started digging on the ground, thinking that if the soil was good, he would soon reach the summit. He kept working, and after a while, he mentioned that the area should be enough, typically, to plant potatoes, were cut in half, so he noticed something and wondered what it was. He felt a sense of being cursed, and wondered if it was really safe to eat. Shuri replied that it was a great find and suggested that if Tenno plunged into the water, it could help accumulate more soil. He then finished cultivating the field and felt strange. He had only planned to create a small garden, but was turning into an entire farm. He had already planted 100 potatoes, but more than half the field was still empty. He wondered if he had made a mistake somewhere. Shuri seemed sad, wondering why Tenno buried the potatoes after they had the trouble to pick them up. Ko mentioned that if his master wanted to store them, he could have used the underground depot. Karen added that he wasn't sure why, but he felt there was a reason Tenno was avoiding that option. Tenno explained that he didn't mind planting them now, but the season seemed to be getting warmer compared to when he arrived. Besides, with such a large field, weeds would be a problem. How would he manage everything? He realized he needed more stone dolls to help. He greeted their dolls, thanking them for their hard work. Now that he had workers tending the field, he decided to check the lake. The water was clearer than before, looking almost untouched. He thought of making soy sauce, but he wasn't sure how to grow soy. However, if there were fish in the lake, he could try making fish sauce instead. He remembered a TV show he had seen once, which mentioned that fish sauce could be made by mixing fish with salt and letting ferment. He had the habit of catching random pieces of knowledge like that. Fluffy approached him, and he appreciated Fluffy for his efforts. He said that maybe Laughter was trying to tell him something, but he didn't understand at the time. Hidden began fishing with a stick, explaining that he had tried to do something similar to a fish hook, so it should work. He also mentioned that they would be fishing for food. After waiting for a while, something unexpected appeared on the floor, surprising everyone. Tennant thought they might have taken something, and he started wondering if he had a mouth. He thanked Fluffy, believing it was all thanks to him, and they decided it was enough to make fish sauce. Once they had enough, they could stock up in fish sauce and grill the rest. Had been a long time since he had eaten fish. The scene then moved to the castle, where Miss Lost reported everything to the king. The magician beside the king was surprised and asked if the report was genuine. The players were watching Miss Lost's return and were wondering how it was possible, since less than a month had passed. He thought something might have happened. At that moment, a man approached Gamers and reported that all commanders had been ordered to meet in the courtroom. Once they were all assembled, the bald man asked Miss Lost if he could identify the cause of the rift of the magic stone. Miss Lost, a warrior loyal to his country, was always ready to execute orders without fear. However, this time, he felt that he was being judged without a just cause, waiting for punishment for no reason. He then explained that when they arrived at the entrance of the forest, they suddenly ran to a wall of light. When he came to himself, he discovered that all the slaves had already escaped. In addition, the prey of his improved animals had been pulled out. Caught in the midst of such an incomprehensible situation, he tried to make a sound. The man was surprised and asked if they hadn't died, to which Miss Lost replied that it seemed absurd. The king, clearly angry, stood up to leave, but the man asked where he was going, feeling that the situation was totally crazy. The king then ordered the Fourth Order Chivalric to remain in wait until further order. While the others were leaving, Gamil referred to Miss Lost as a coward. Miss Lost and the man who had gone on the mission with him were there, both worried when Gamers approached. He expressed relief that they had returned safely. Miss Lost admitted that he still did not fully understand what had happened and asked Gamers what he thought was going on in the forest. While there was nothing abnormal about his appearance, Miss Lost shared his fear, explaining that it seemed that they were being rejected by the forest. Honestly, Miss Lost thought they were dead after going through the wall of light. However, although all the slaves had escaped, none of the soldiers appeared out of the ordinary. Leaving him completely baffled about what really happened, Gamers speculated that it might have been a warning and guessed that if there were any creature greater than the king of the forest, might have been responsible. Miss Lost asked if Gamers was suggesting that the forest king was behind it all. Gamers replied that it might have been, but given how strong the forest king was, they would have detected long before. In such a situation, there was a possibility that a creature greater than the forest king would reside in the forest. Meanwhile, the king walked down the hall, deeply disturbed, found it impossible for all slaves to stay, and the idea seemed absurd. Even if such a thing were possible, it would mean that the slave crests, reinforced by the magic stone, became ineffective. He mentioned it was impossible because offerings had been made to the magic stone for over 100 years to strengthen it. The king then looked out, his mind running. He thought the barriers that protected the country were still working properly, but perhaps something was wrong with the improved beasts they had cast into the forest. He wondered if the beasts regained their consciousness of the magic stone. Through the magic stone, they could gain the power of the forest and become the rulers of the world. He was always obedient to the will of the gods, and as he took advantage of the magic of the forest, he was also preventing the wild beasts from fighting back. There have been no acts of resistance in the last 10 years. Just a few more steps, and it would all be over. He laughed in front of the two women, but his laughter quickly turned to anger. Drawing his sword, he wondered why it had to happen at that moment. Enough, he murmured, his voice filled with fury. The forest will be burned. Tenno was preparing to make the fish sauce, and explained that the first step was to remove the head, internal organs, and blood to ensure that fish could be cut cleanly, the knight of silver or cut through fish easily. The next day he preserved the fish with salt, emphasizing that the amount of salt was crucial. He needed to calculate how much to use based on the amount of fish they had, and for the size of the fish, 20 cent salt should be enough. He continued the process, stating that the first step was to rub enough salt into the fish. So they put the salt fish in a jar, ensuring it was firmly sealed without gaps. It continued until the bottle was completely filled, adding a little more salt to be safe. Then put the bottle in a container and covered it, explaining that it had to be stored in a cold and dark place for about a year or two. Tenno considered the possibility that the result could be different due to the magic in the world, so he decided to store it for 3 months instead. After that time, the texture became more viscous, and he could smell the fermentation. He decided to use magic to speed up the process, taking it to about a year of aging. Ko wondered what the master was doing now. Surely he didn't know, but could smell something good in the air. Tenno, using magic, successfully made the sauce, but as he smelled it, he thought it smelled. Despite the unpleasant odor, it was unique, and as the fish meat had broken, he felt it should be enough. Now all that was left was to filter the mixture through a thin cloth. He did as planned. And he was happy to find out that the sauce had turned into a beautiful light brown color, a precious drop of perfection. After trying, he discovered that salinity was right, delicious. Now it was time to apply heat to stop the fermentation process. It was time to cook. Ko watched him while cooking the meat, preparing it at the barbecue. He also froze the remaining fish, so they decided to enjoy the grilled fish that day. Since they were coming back soon, they also planned to grill Karen's part. Once the fish was fully cooked, they turned to the other side and drizzled a few drops of the fish sauce. The fragrance of food filled the air. Tenno served and took a bite, reacting with a completely different expression than expected. Chief and Ko seemed concerned, unsure of their reaction. But Tenno's face lit up. The fish was incredibly delicious with the sauce, and he wanted there to be rice to accompany. Your efforts were finally worth it. Just as he was savoring the moment, he noticed that the wolves were beginning to approach the fish. He quickly took it from them, telling them to wait. Since the food was salty, it would not be good for them, and they certainly could not eat it. But as they looked at him, he found his look intimidating. In response, he said, "All right, each of them will receive a drop." Then he realized he still needed to grill Karen's part. Just then he heard a sound, and turned to find out it was Shuri. He told her to stop scaring him, playing that he preferred to eat the grilled meat. Now he could finally eat in peace. However, when he was about to enjoy the meal, he saw the chief coming to take a bite. He was eating the fish, commenting that it was incredibly tasty. There was no time to let your thoughts wander. Chief was watching the others eat too. That night, he lay down on the wolf. Noting that the day had been really tiring, there was nothing better than a soft bed now. He gently touched the wolf hair, amazed at the gradual evolution of monsters. Was really fascinating. The skin felt incredibly soft. He decided that the next day, he would check the fields. He thought to himself that the little ones might very well be called the agricultural squadron now. The next morning, he went to the field and greeted the dolls, commenting that it looked like his clothes had gone through a substantial update. As dolls worked alongside ants in the field, he decided to help them. He asked if they needed anything, but they didn't answer. He was shocked, didn't realize they didn't need him anymore, so Shuri came up with something in his hand, asking Tenno to put his magic into it. Chief showed his own item, which was bigger. Tenno said he'd be happy to help, but he wasn't sure what he was supposed to do, how they used their magic on the items. Tenno wondered if they were really trying to evict him, but it looked like they wanted him to spill his magic too. He asked if it was enough. When the items began to crack, Tenno apologized, realizing he might have overreacted. Suddenly, little insects like Shuri and Chief began to emerge from the cracks. Tenno shouted loudly in surprise. After that, Tenno left with Ko and the others, apologizing for screaming so loudly. He felt bad for Shuri and Chief, but realized that he had never been good with insects. If those creatures had been centipedes, he would have been amazed by fear. The boss was in Chay's back, and Tenno wondered if it was okay for Chai to give him a ride. Tenno told Ko it was nice to hang out with him again after so long. As he caressed Ko, he asked Chai if he could ride it too, but Chai rejected the idea, moving away. Tenno thought they both seemed to be getting along lately, but maybe they didn't like the attention he was giving Ko. Chai disagreed, insisting it wasn't the case. Ko provoked Chai, saying. Che said it wasn't like that, but then he looked around, and Ko and Tenno found his reaction cute. They soon arrived in front of another cave, and Tenno observed that there were many caves in the forest. Approaching the cave entrance, Tenno noticed something inside. There were creatures like wolves, crawling towards you. The scene moved to the castle, where numerous magicians and horsemen stood before the king. A man spoke, announcing that 25 magicians of the Second Order Chavrik would be escorting them, while the Fifth Order Chavrik would be charged with subduing the monsters. The players understood that this was the result of their deliberations. The king then spoke, saying that until now, he had been merciful to the animals in the forest. All his actions had been to the glory of the country. However, despite their repeated acts of mercy, the animals had continued to resist, and their patience had worn out. That's why he decided to burn the forest. The knights understood why they were called there. Finally, it was time to show what they were made of. However, the players wondered if this was possible. The magicians possessed fearsome power, and considering that the monsters would not stand a chance against the knights of the Fifth Order Chavrik, it was highly likely that they were not facing the true kings of the forest in this situation. The scene returned to Tenno, where the beasts were advancing to attack him. However, a barrier created by Tenno caused them to fall back. Chi went to the wolves, telling them to stop being foolish and to control themselves. He then looked at Tenno. Tenno, using your binding magic, locked the animals in a cage, commenting that it was a good thing they were trapped. Just as he thought, he added, he said Chi don't worry, and then he set them free. But when he freed them, all the beasts suddenly fell, spitting blood out of their mouths. Tenno was shocked and quickly moved to heal them. As he did, he realized that these beasts were Che's friends, and they seemed severely malnourished, irritated inside him, and he murmured, "Hell never forgive whoever did this to them." Meanwhile, in the castle, the king addressed his subjects. Let's show the kings of the forest how frightening the Anvilus kingdom can be. His words fed his anger, and with a gesture, the king cast lightning into the sky. A few days later, Tenno tripled the number of members of the agricultural squad. Soon after, a small lake appeared beside the field. Tenno asked the ants if they could help the earth in return for it. Fluffy, who was passing by, stopped by the water and began to create a body of water to release on the ground. Tenno apologized, explained that he did not understand what Fluffy had said, and I was wondering if Fluffy was suggesting that they cut down the trees to expand the lake. Then Tenno kept working and came home. Noting that the day had been particularly difficult, the spiders then appeared, urging him to follow them. When he took him to the warehouse, Ko noticed and wondered if something was wrong. When Tenno came in, he saw that the empty shelves were now full. He realized that they needed more storage space to store their harvest and make sure they had enough food for the winter. Tenno decided to enlarge the room, so he froze the time in the cooling room and found that the dolls were removing the locks. He also noticed that the dolls had arranged everything clean and efficient, as if they were professionals, putting items in their own places. Just as Tenno was about to help, he stopped, not sure if it was necessary, and that's why he went hunting with Ko. Ko, in his own language, told Tenno that sometimes he should follow his heart. As Ko advanced, Tenno called, asking him to wait. Together, they went hunting. After a while, they reached the edge of the barrier, and Tenno observed that, besides the deviation, it took 2 hours to get there. He wanted to know if it was possible to expand the barrier further away. Soon they found a dragon. Ko growled at him, and while the dragon was preparing to attack, Ko tried to protect Tenno. Meanwhile, Karen was flying up, happy to have returned early. Being inside Tenno's magic barrier always made him feel great. However, when he saw Wyvern, he noticed how rare it was to see one. Karen then noticed Tenno on the ground and realized that wyverns had hard and robust external bodies, so normal attacks probably wouldn't work. He decided to intervene and act. But to your surprise, Tenno attacked Wyvern in the air, cutting off one of his wings. This left Karen and the wolves in shock. Tenno himself was also taken back, realizing that his reflexes had triggered after his previous encounter. He did not expect to cut the wing, but it happened automatically, almost as if he had trained for it. After Wyvern was defeated, Tenno asked Ko if they could eat it. Ko's reaction suggested it would be quite delicious. Only then did Tenno notice Karen, and with a smile he received him, asking why he seemed so surprised. When they came home, Ko even gave Chi his share of Wyvern's meat, and Chi thanked him for it. Tenno couldn't even get a good look at the job, because the dolls wouldn't let him. He was worried Chi would leave once he met his friends, but it turned out that his worries were unfounded. Tenno screamed out of frustration, wondering if anything had changed since then, and where the source of the curse may be. At the same time, lightning struck the castle near the king, and the king was shocked, wondering if he was under attack. However, it seemed impossible, as the country was protected by a strong barrier. Gammers was sitting with Miss Lost when they discussed the strike. Miss Lost was surprised to learn that the king had been attacked. Especially because he was not there to testify, he questioned how it was possible, given the protection of the king's barrier. Gammers explained that the lightning had occurred right in front of the king's eyes. Miss Lost was impressed by the force of the barrier, but he was curious about the king's next move. Gammers informed him that the king had locked himself in the magic stone room and ordered the magicians to go into the forest to stay behind and reinforce the barrier with several layers. Miss Lost was surprised and asked why the seemingly invincible emperor would act so cowardly. Gammers replied that given the circumstances, they did not have many options. The country had never been attacked in hundreds of years, and the barrier that protected her had never been invaded before. Miss Lost wondered about the meaning behind the words of Gammers. Gammers explained that someone launched an attack powerful enough to breach the country's barrier. That's why he was so upset about it, too. The scene changed to Tenno, who was with Ko. He wondered if the attack had lost, and he felt relieved that the remaining pieces of the wave were still usable. He suggested that they eat, and even asked the goons to dissect the body, though he wondered if it was a little too big for them. However, he was impressed by how quickly they worked. As they carried the pieces, he thought to himself, who would certainly use every part of the body of the wyvern, and he wished the creature to rest in peace. Tenno then grilled the meat, commenting that it seemed to harden when cooked. He wanted to know what it would be like if they plunged into some fruit juice afterwards. A wolf asked Ko if he had already eaten wyvern meat. Ko replied that the meat was quite elastic, so it must be worth eating. But he also noticed a sweet smell coming from the food Tenno was cooking. Tenno felt the increased pressure while boiling the sweet fruit juice along with a vegetable similar to onion, and the aroma was overwhelming. After mixing the grilled wyvern meat with the sauce and adding some spice, Tenno took his first bite and commented that it would have been perfect if he could have eaten with white rice and fresh eggs together. Unfortunately, wyvern's meat didn't taste like chicken, which was disappointing, so he noticed that the dolls were frying some meat, so he decided to try. While he thought about it, he remembered a TV show that mentioned extracting oil from camellia seeds. He wondered if this world also had flowers like this, which could be used to extract oil. Tenno noticed that the wolves and Karen were fighting for grilled meat, with Karen claiming it was his. One of the wolves told Karen he was overeating and there wasn't enough for everyone. They asked for larger portions. Karen, in response, told him to stop pulling and go share with Ko. Amid all the chaos, Tenno thought to himself that he could not escape the mess. He went in and concluded that although it was still impossible to make the ideal Friday meal, they might be able to create something delicious if they fried the pumpkin-like vegetables. They should try to extract oil from them, as they could extract oil from a variety of foods. It seemed worth trying with every option available. Tenno spilled magic on some of the seeds, and tasted one. He thought its flavor was different, and thought it might be useful as oil. He tried another one and found it even better. Soon after, the spiders arrived, bringing a fruit. Tenno thanked and took it to check the seed. As he examined, he suddenly understood something, and he asked the spiders where they had found the fruit, with Cheyenne and Kuro following. Tenno went with the spiders to the tree where they had gathered the fruit. He noticed that the trees were together, but they were outside the barrier. He remembered that the last time he tried to expand the barrier, and the others agreed with him, but he hasn't gotten what he wanted yet. The scene changed back to Gammers and Mrs. Lost. Gammers mentioned it would take about 10 days to travel from the entrance of the castle to the forest, and it would probably take several months to reach the center of the forest. Miss Gammers explained that the plan was to burn down the forest in that place. How can it take 3 or 5 times to hit? Meanwhile, Tenno stood on the ground, but felt as if he were flying over the forest. Using magic to examine the area, he noticed a particular place that had aroused his interest. Cheyenne asked what Tenno was doing, and Kuro commented that it looked like Tenno was making a birthday wish on his body. Tenno replied that first he would decide the size of the barrier and then purify the area. The scene went back to the king, who was sitting in the magic stone room, confidently declaring that no attack would break its barriers now. He believed this would be the last fight the animals would make. Gammers mentioned that with more power, they could watch not only the country, but possibly the whole world. Meanwhile, Tenno was prepared to send the curse back to its origin. In swords, a bright light surrounded the magic stone, causing all wise men to gasp in shock. Tenno, standing in his house, proclaimed that he would never forget the curse that had been put on the earth. All these curses would soon return to the pitcher. A lightning ball appeared above the magic stone, releasing a series of rays that hit all present. Tenno declared that curses on the rivers and lakes would also return, and he would purify all the trees' roots, and even the leaves. The color of the magic stone changed, and both the magicians and the king was in shock. Tenno then felt a strange feeling, as if something was changing inside him. A few days later, Ko was patrolling the area, observing that it would take more than a day to cover the entire area. The scene changed back a few days, where everyone felt a mighty wind approaching. Ko wondered where it came from, and he realized that he could no longer feel the presence of the barrier. The chief wondered if anything had happened to Master Tenno, and then Tenno's here. Asking why everyone was gathered, Ko couldn't help but think that Tenno had eradicated such a large barrier without breaking a sweat, and he wanted to know what Tenno was planning. One day Tenno came home to find a complete wooden deck. It was incredibly spacious, and he noticed that there were sliding doors that were easy to open and close, as well as doors to each room, including a bathroom and a bathroom, as he wanted. As he took in his surroundings, a doll came to call him, looking excited. The doll showed him the massive structure of the door they had built. They brought some stones, and Tenno realized they needed glass for the doors, so he used his magic to create it for them. Then Tenno checked the living room and found it impeccable. He wanted to know if he could inspect the walls, and the dolls agreed. As he did, he discovered that the walls seemed to have been infused with magic, probably by the dolls themselves. He considered leaving her as she was, and he went on to inspect the oil extraction machine. Using his magic, he applied pressure to the machine, realizing that he could manipulate it even more with his abilities. Tenno hoped to extract only a small amount of oil, but the result was better than he expected. The oil had a nice pink color and a sweet aroma that he found quite intriguing. Satisfied with the result, he inspected all the oil that had been extracted, but he realized he needed to upgrade the extraction machine in the future. He thought how to fry the eggplant-type vegetables had been deliciously, and I was wondering if the wolves would appreciate the fried vegetables. Maybe they could serve them in small portions. While Tenno fed the wolves, Chi approached him, expressing gratitude because your friends were getting better. However, his friends wondered if it was really safe to trust a human. She answered, asking if they had not felt the gentle magic of Tenno. The wolves still hesitated a little, and Tenno smiled, mentioning that he was happy to see everyone getting better. He then offered the wolves more food. While they ate, Tenno observed that the wolves seemed to really like pumpkin vegetables. Reminded him he hadn't appointed them yet, so he decided to name them. The male wolves would be Chaya and Chatta, The one with the white spots would be Charu, and the female wolves would be Sasa and Sammy. The one with the red spots and red eyes would be Kiza. Tenno wanted to incorporate the character kanji to the T in their names, and he couldn't help but think that his sense of name was flawless. Later, Tenno entered another room and found that the cooking area was spotless. The dogs had served the meat to Che's friends, who were now happy eating. Tenno entered his room and sat down with Ko and the others, commenting that it was great that he could finally fry his food. However, he still wanted a frying pan, and he was wondering how he would find iron ore, especially since he had no magnet with him. Then suddenly he remembered the magnet in his wallet. From that day on, whenever they went out, they kept looking for iron ore. While examining some crystals, Tenno noted that all he did was look for iron with a small magnet. He was happy to remember the magnet in his wallet. They were looking inside an area, inside the barrier, but there were already many caves. Tenno wondered if this area was ever a volcanic region. They couldn't reach the innermost part of the mountain, and it was the 5th day. He thought of how many places they had visited so far. They had found many different stones, but none of them were the ore he was looking for. Even if he wasn't tired, the constant hunt had exhausted him, so he decided it was time to return. Soon then, he noticed a dark path through the bushes and wondered if he led to another cave. He lit up his surroundings with magic and got in the way. To his surprise, he found a structure and wondered if it was an entrance, but it didn't look as cold as a typical cave entrance. He saw a blue-green squirrel, and if it was still alive, he used to purify and touch the animal, but nothing happened. Suddenly, the squirrel got loose, fell to the ground, and kept looking at him. He thought it was cute. And although the wolves usually eat squirrels, it seemed that the wolves weren't interested in him. He couldn't help wondering why, so asked Kiza if dark wolves usually didn't go after small animals. Kiza replied that one was fine. Then the squirrel pointed to his companions and made a sound. Signing Tenno, he understood that the squirrel wanted him to save his friends. Tenno did, and soon the squirrels gathered around him, interacting playful with him. He thought there were too many. Kiza seemed nervous, urging them to go out and help their master, so Grohl making squirrels spread, and Tenno sent a call for help. When they returned, Tenno reflected that they had walked all day, visiting 4 different places, but had not yet had any success. He thought if there was only one squirrel, it wouldn't have been a problem. He recognized that finding iron ore wouldn't be easy, but they had a lot of time, so they decided to take things at their own pace. Then they reached the cave where Tenno found Kiza and the others, was only 15 minutes from home, and they had not yet explored. However, Tenno thought it would be useless. He saw a piece of metal and realized it was what he wanted. He was disappointed, as this key was the closest to his home, and he had lost all his time in the other caves. When Tenno returned home, Karen returned and mentioned that he had not found any dragons that day. Ko pointed out that Tenno had just arrived. Karen was shocked to see the squirrel on Tenno's shoulder. The sight frightened the squirrel, and he quickly fled. Karen realized the act was a little childish. Shuri said he understood, adding that he didn't even know that the squirrels had entered their house, and that he didn't like them very much. Tenno, however, was thinking about how the number of creatures had increased and wondered if they could get along. Soon the dolls gathered in front of Tenno. He was confused and didn't understand what they wanted, but they took him to the field. There, he noticed that they had plowed less than 2 months ago and now were able to harvest about 10% of the crops. They just helped plant the seeds and water a few times. He wondered if they could help with the harvest too. As Tenno looked around, he noticed vegetables that looked like chard, gourds, and a large daikon vegetable. They were all huge. In the kitchen, he cut them off, saying he had never returned any of them before, but what they couldn't eat, they used as a compound. The vegetable-like potato was soft and flabby with a sweet aroma, but it didn't taste very good, so they decided to put it aside. If all goes well, they can add more seasoning next time. The boss tried and said it was delicious, wondering how the root could be so sweet. Shuri wondered if the number of vegetables Tenno had brought had increased. Tenno thought if they could eat more of this. Then he looked around at the others and wondered what they were doing in front of the garden. They were lined up and discussing something, with the boss asking for help with everything. Before Tenno realized, a new map for cultivation had been completed, which shocked him. He hadn't even been asked about it. Later, they found iron ore and used it to make a frying pan. The scene reminded him of the direwolves, where they fought against an unknown enemy for a long time. When Che's allies, who had been swallowed up by darkness, attacked him, he lost sight and was ready to die, but when he regained consciousness, only a few of his comrades remained, wandering around, wondering if the place they found was created by a king, where they could hide for a while. One of them agreed to rest a little and prepared to fight humans to the death. After all, one of them woke up, wondering if they'd lost consciousness. He also felt the wind of healing and wondered if it was magic. His body felt lighter and his mind lighter. He called the others, asking if they were still alive. Although he was not in better condition, he was strong enough to catch small prey, all thanks to the wind of healing. Looking around the forest, he noticed that the miasma had disappeared. He wondered if the threat had come out. Another wolf approached him and said he would accompany the first wolf in the hunt. The first wolf thanked him, noting that they should also think about helping their other comrades. Only then they heard a sound coming from the entrance. It was Chi and Ko who surprised them all. They argued how it could be a directional wolf because of its huge size, and there was also a spider. When it came to Tenno, they were shocked and referred to him as the enemy. But how Ko and Chi looked at them. They both seemed intimidating. The scene changed to the present, where Tenno was shocked to see that Ko and Chi had grown up. He wondered why, while cultivating the land and collecting the products, everything had been thoroughly investigated through attempts and errors by a change of pace. Tenno decided to use the materials he had found while exploring the caves. He even discovered that spiders could produce ropes. Chi was also able to use magic, which he did. I try to wonder if Chi and Ko had transformed or evolved in any way. Inside the cave there were the cubs, and Tenno noticed that they seemed to have lost the will to fight. He decided to use purifying, dissipating, healing, and cleaning them all. A wolf observed that the power he was using was the same as the wind of healing that filled the forest. Ko agreed, saying that his master had purified the forest and restored his powers. The wolf was surprised, thinking it was true. The king of the forest admired his master, who was such a benevolent magical entity. Tenno looked at Chi, thinking he looked like a dog more than anything at first. He wanted Chi to stay that size forever, as it seemed intimidating to be seen down as if everyone was headed towards the house, which was built on a giant rock, and the wide area around it had been completely cleared. Tenno commented that he could not understand how wild the place had been, and wondered if the field in the midst of his house had naturally become a forest. It seemed like nothing was unusual that morning. The boss received Tenno, telling him that they had followed Golan's instructions and planted all the trees that would produce the fruits Tenno wanted in an area. He thanked his clan for their hard work. Shuri added that his clan had worked several times more than the chief's plan had required. The direwolves were shocked to see the giant insects, and some even fainted. Tenno then looked into the forest and saw that it was well maintained. Besides the vegetation he planted, there were about 90 known types of trees, with almost 200 fruit trees. It was impressive, and now they had 30 plants that produced grapefruit. He wondered how they managed to plant all this in just half a day. He went to the kitchen, saying that as long as he had the proper tools, he could make grape wine. They should also announce the vegetables of the land that they had just cultivated, as they planned to use them for seasoning. They also had an iron pot now, and it took about a month to forge an iron ore pan. It was able to easily identify useful stones and metal ores, including a multi-purpose rock he used as a substitute for coal in the house and for his one-eyed golem. It was easy to process and had magical properties, although iron was difficult to manufacture. He managed to create the kitchenware he wanted. The tools made from silver ores and gold were more durable, but required much more magic to do. These materials were especially useful for making glass windows and knives, and surprisingly, they had low thermal conductivity. He took a rock and said that, as for the blue and red ores they found while exploring the cave, the cute creatures seemed to like them very much. He used them to make a translucent bottle, although Shed lost her glow over time. He collected the stones, including the strengthening magics, that could be found at a consistent pace in the hearts of specific monsters. He was sure that someday this would become even more useful. First, the taste of Irish potato vegetables could be weak, but he could make flour out of them. He had learned to do it by watching TV, and it should be easy. Now all he had to do was grate the potatoes with a silver grater. He wet the mixture, saying that then they wrapped the grated potatoes in a dry cloth and pressed it firmly. A soft white consistency emerged, and then they left for 20 minutes before they discarded the water. He repeated this process several times, diving the potatoes into the water and then discarding the water, increasingly accumulating at the base. After work, he placed the solidified nodules at the bottom of the container in 2 dishes to dry. He continued this method, and eventually he found success. Looking around, he noticed that the new lumps were resting on top, while the others, although rare, were also from outside. While everyone settled in their own homes, he felt a sense of loneliness, especially because they were so big and now there were more dolls around. Then he decided to prepare rabbit meat, which was closer to chicken at the time. He massaged with salt, dived into flour, and then cooked in the iron pot. The pot looked different, but soon he had made courage. As he proved, he felt deeply emotional, realizing that there was really nothing like courage. Taking another bite, he noticed a spider approaching him. He offered some of the food, telling me to keep it a secret. Then he stood up to walk, feeling a little afraid, and mentioned that he would store the remaining flour. While he was waiting, he thought of cutting the sweet and bitter remains. Realizing that he could probably make sugar from them, he remembered how his mother had made sugar beet. He discovered that there was a lot of scum that made the mixture bitter, removed the scum, and continued to apply heat until the mixture began to thicken, eventually becoming purple. He kept the process, removing the solidified parts and spreading them across a wide surface to cool. When he tasted it, he thought it was sweet, with a rich umami flavor. Outside, a strange beast was watching over them. Ko took the smell of the food, and said it looked like his master was preparing his next meal. She noted that although he had never smelled so sweet before, it was intriguing. As Karen arrived, Ko told him that there had been no success again. Karen wondered what he was talking about, and answered that she was looking for every corner of the barrier daily, while Ko just sat and relaxed. Ko replied that they were adequately protecting his master. Tenno then arrived with a meal, saying it was time to eat. Everyone gathered to eat, and Tenno explained that he had decided to mix the sugar he made that day with the fish sauce from before, resulting in a teriyaki red meat. Shuri mentioned that it tasted so good, words couldn't describe it. Ko also agreed, saying it tasted amazing. As Karen ate, she commented that all the hard work had paid. She had worked tirelessly, flying through the miasma while searching for dragons. Shuri mentioned that he was feeling the presence of a dragon very strongly recently, and it was strange that none had been found yet. Karen agreed, saying it should be good news, but finding a dragon was complicated. Ko mocked Karen, saying she was making a lot of excuses. The boss intervened, saying they couldn't deny Karen was doing her best. Karen replied that they should be grateful for it. Only then they saw a beast approaching Tenno without anyone noticing, and he started eating the food, and everyone realized he was a dragon of the earth. Tenno explained that the dragon had just joined them, while Fluffy was flying in the sky. The dragon flew, and Tenno noticed that he could fly without using his wings. Seemed different, but maybe Fluffy and the dragon were of the same species. He wondered why he thought they were the same species. A normal dog inside the house was completely terrified of what was happening in front of him. Meanwhile, in the castle, the magic stone room had been badly damaged, with scratches covering the stones. The king examined, thinking there was nothing wrong with the barrier. One of his men said it was impossible, but the magicians would find the problem in a month. If the four had forgotten that they had been entrusted with the blessings of the king's magic stone, the magicians thought the king was right. They were already cast with unedged magic by the king when he was testing his magic stone. The head wizard supposed they were now reaping what they had sown. Only the four knew that all lives sacrificed to the magic stone had been used to extend their own lives and maintain the barrier at the time believed that the force was justice. The wizard then mentioned that the world would never forgive them. He left, thinking that the kings of the forest were trembling, suppressing the power of the magic stone, which meant that they had become a force that posed a threat to the country. He wondered how many more lives would have to be sacrificed to repair the magic stone, and he thought that the country had now called the wrath of the world upon itself. The bosses, standing in the field near the stone house, looked at the small spiders and noticed that recently it seemed that the children had begun to manipulate their traits. His basic strategy was to dress in hellfire and defeat the enemy with speed, or at least that's how it should have been. Every time the master saw them, he sent an image of manipulating the wires, and the boss asked the children if they had experienced. He found out that instead of just running away, they could catch their prey shooting at the wires faster. It seemed that they had developed their abilities to the point of even setting traps. The boss guessed he should try it himself, and he thought their idea was really brilliant. Tenno called the dragon a flying lizard, but he felt his name didn't work. It was so hot that he couldn't get any good ideas, and besides, it wasn't even a lizard. So he mentioned Kanako because of his brown color, and since it even looked like a dinosaur. He thought of names like Rex or Ptera. He kept coming with different names, but there was no reaction from the dragon. However, when he referred to him as a flying lizard again, the dragon showed a small reaction. Continuing with the question of giving names, Tenno decided to nominate the dogs as well. He appointed leader A. The male dogs were called Sora and Nu, while the bitches were named Amy, Ayu, and Mira. He was proud of himself for giving them such good names. The colors of the dogs reminded him of the blue indigo, and they all looked very similar, so he had to be careful not to mix them. After that, he jumped into the lake to shower, exclaiming it was so cool. But he also felt incredibly warm, as the temperature seemed to be close to 40 degrees Celsius, and he wondered if it was summer in that world. So he floated in the water, noting that the river flowing through the forest was great, and he was surprised that they had almost built all the way to the river. The fields and orchards were growing more and more. He looked up at the sky, where 2 wolves were flying, carrying trees with the help of his magic. Tenno realized how they were moving the trees. He thought the trees and wolves were floating, which made the world look so amazing. Tired of summer heat. He said the seasons years ago seemed to have disappeared. He also believed it was due to the power of his master. Chi mentioned that it was his first time experiencing it, and now he understood how intense summer can be. Ko replied that it could be very difficult to bear, but he noticed that the boss seemed so excited during this time. She said it was as expected from someone called the Keeper of Death. Even the King of Fenrir could not tolerate so much heat. Ko growled, saying he could use his magic to cool down, but he was really enjoying the heat after so long. The boss didn't pay much attention to him, but instead he asked, "Doesn't it look like something was wrong?" "It seems our master was not doing very well," Ko agreed, mentioning that he was also thinking the same thing. He started getting dizzy, and he thought he should get out of the water soon, so suddenly he wondered what he was writing about. Looking around, he thought it might be an amoeba, but it looked different. His eyes were small, and it didn't look bad. Actually, he felt good and cool, so he thought it was okay. Soon after, someone arrived, speaking in his tongue, saying Tenno was playing with the spirits of the water. The spirits were attracted by clean magic energy, but even they had never seen a whole group of them before. The person warned Tenno to be careful not to share too much mana with them. At that moment, Tenno suddenly spit something out, making the boss wonder if he was feeling bad. Ko came to check too, however, Tenno assured them that he was fine. When they started preparing the meal, Tenno realized that the meat and potatoes he had prepared since morning were gone in an instant. Everyone was fighting over the food, and he wanted to know if he should do it 3 times more next time. He thought he needed at least 3 more big pots, or maybe even 5. He even mentioned that if the golem of an eye could help in the kitchen as well, they might be able to avoid such confusion. However, for this to work, he would need a larger cooking area and more coal shops. The heat was so intense that he could not think straight, and his head seemed to be spinning. The scene moved to the castle where a large number of slaves stood before a group of magicians. One of the magicians noted that there were certainly 100 of them, and instructed them to be sent to the magical warehouse. With so many, should be able to repair the magic stone. Another magician considered the situation and suggested that they evaluate progress and increase the number if necessary. So he reminded the others that these slaves were born for a purpose, to serve as disposable warriors, research materials, or workers for the least of jobs. That was the norm in their country, and anyone who raised an objection had been publicly executed today. No one dared to speak. In fact, many people believed it was a necessary sacrifice for the good of prosperous life. Such was the reality of the nation in which they lived. Meanwhile, Tenno was floating in the amoeba in the river. Looking at the sun, he noticed that it didn't look like he had a fever, but maybe the heat was making it hard for him to sleep. Being in the water was good, helping him relax. He heard the rustling sounds and saw the golems, small ants, and spiders working. He thought if he kept playing day after day, his heart would end up hurting. He decided not to leave the river and focus on finding ways to avoid the curse. If humans and civilization existed in that world was still unknown, but when it came to curses, were humans not generally the principal culprits? There may be humans somewhere, he thought, although he had the feeling they weren't in the woods. On the contrary, the fact that the world seemed to be nothing but a forest only made it more certain that people should exist. He wanted to see them in front of him, and his mind wandered through the thoughts of the curse. Meanwhile, the castle slaves were being taken to the magic stone room. Tenno thought that in Japan curses were often associated with the target of a specific person. The whole place may be cursed, but he believed it was only his own theory. Could this place be cursed perhaps by earthly spirits? He looked at the lizard and murmured that it would not be possible, although somehow the situation was beginning to feel strangely fun. But the scariest thing of all was the shadow clinging to them. He suspected that Ko and Karen were being possessed by her. If they found her, they needed to cleanse her immediately. There was possession. Shuri and the others were being taken by a malicious curse. There was nothing inherently good or bad about curses. As the wolves wandered, Ko felt a strange feeling. Tenno explained that when someone was possessed, they gradually became eroded by him. He wondered if it was more a curse or something demonic, and even if purification could work with demons, he was no longer sure. Were demons summoned through sacrifices, using this power to dominate the world? It looked like something from a movie he'd seen. The heat was so intense that he was starting to feel stunned, but no matter, they were both enemies. He decided to take them all down. Then he realized it was strangely fun. To avoid the summoning of demons, what kind of magic circles would it take to summon? He couldn't imagine what the magic circle would be like if it weren't a demon, but just a curse. Wouldn't it be better to deal with the root cause? If it was a person or an object. However, if sacrifices were really involved, it would be incredibly dangerous. They needed to find a way to deal with it first. The scene changed for the slaves being killed. One of the wizards thought to himself that once the technique was activated, everything would be solved. The only thing left was to investigate the cause without allowing his emotions to interfere in a place like that. Tenno felt a strange change in his thoughts as he considered the magic circles. As he didn't know much about them, it seemed a good idea to imagine using a black stone. However, if the criminal died and the sacrifice was put on the black stone, it would leave a bitter taste in his mouth. he decided to put them to sleep, and in the meantime, he thought it would be wise to make them completely forget the method. How to erase their memories seemed to be the best option. If it was a curse, it would be very difficult to deal with it, so he decided to imagine the black stone again and bend the retaliation as he had done before. Then he would seal it in a way that the curse could never again emerge, making it seem as if it had become part of a shrine. Meanwhile, the wizards in the castle were singing, channeling their power to the magic stone. Tenno was also using his power, contemplating what he should do about the curse. He activated his magic with force, releasing a wave of energy toward the sky. At the same time, the magic stone in the castle began to react, releasing energy that caused everyone to retreat in shock. The slaves looked around confused. While the magicians fought with his words, "Your spell clearly broken," even the chief wizard had fallen. The chief wizard quickly began to use his power to try to cure the magic stone. Tenno's thoughts focused when he wondered what the wizard was doing. His head suddenly cleared, and he wondered if his previous confusion was due to dehydration. He got up, telling him to go back to bed early, so it occurred to him he could have used magic to cool the house. Why hadn't he thought of it before?